Good morning, everyone. This meeting of the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense is titled Masters of Air, Overcoming Airborne Pathogens Indoors. And I joked the other day, with no one actually going to work, how important is this issue? Since people are working remotely, we might want to talk about people's homes as well. When our staff told me the title of this meeting, I commended them for coming up with something interesting, but why Masters of the Air? And they told me that Masters of the Air is the title of a novel and a TV series about the 100th heavy bomb group during World War II as part of the combined bomber offensive over Europe. The Bloody 100, as they were nicknamed, appeared to suffer disproportionately at the hands of the Germans, with its members both respected and pitied by fellow bomber crews. But the 100th came together and formed an unbreakable bond for the greater good. They persevered through 300 missions, played a pivotal role in ending the war in Europe, and earned its place in history as one of the most famous and accomplished of the bomber groups. So just as the 100th mastered the air to overcome its enemies 80 years ago, today we must master the air to overcome airborne pathogens. The air fills our lungs. The air that fills our lungs is the same air that can carry invisible microorganisms and other threats capable of impacting our health and well-being. We have experienced, especially in recent times, how airborne pathogens can disrupt our lives, our economies, and societies. And today we recognize some of the scientists, the innovators, the policymakers, and the industry leaders who have dedicated their lives to understanding and improving the quality of our indoor environments. We're here to learn from their discoveries, to apply their insights, to protect and enhance the lives of people everywhere. As we delve into our discussions, we will hear from very distinguished panelists who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. Dr. Jessica Green, a pioneer in healthy building design, will share her insights on monitoring airborne pathogens and creating resilient systems for our built environments. Dr. Joseph Allen, a champion of the Healthy Buildings program, will highlight the critical role of indoor air quality in public health and the economy. And Dr. Christopher Sales, with his expertise in environmental microbiology and biotechnologies, will discuss innovative solutions for air purification and pathogen reduction. From the private sector, we will gain perspectives from leaders like Melissa Baker, who is in the forefront of developing green building standards that prioritize health and sustainability, and Dr. Catherine Werlo, whose work on air purification technology has revolutionized the way we think about indoor air quality, and Alice Yates, who brings a wealth of experience in policy and sustainable development. And finally, our federal representatives, including Dr. Lisa Ning, Dr. Catherine Ratliff, and Brian Gilligan, will describe some federal efforts and initiatives to improve indoor air quality and reduce pathogen transmission. Their contributions are instrumental in shaping the policies and practices that will safeguard our indoor environments. So as we embark on today's meeting, we need to remember that the air we share connects all of us. It's a vital resources that knows no boundaries, no political affiliations, and no social divides. Our task is to ensure that this shared resources is a source of health, not harm. And I'm confident that the collective wisdom and dedication present in this room will lead to meaningful progress. So let us master the air, and let us rise to the challenge and create indoor environments where every breath is a breath of life, free from airborne pathogens. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion that lies ahead. Next, I'd like to ask the Commission's co-chair, Governor Ridge, if he'd like to make any remarks.
Well, thank you, Donna. Good morning, everyone. I bring you greetings from northwestern Pennsylvania, where, contrary to all rumors, the snow melted a long time ago. And Masters of the Air, interesting, Asha, that we would, Asha and I both know, you still need boots on the ground to take ground and keep it. We have some exceptionally talented people who are going to be testifying for us. They are our boots on the ground. We better understand what the mission is and to overcome any obstacles to achieving our goals. I understand and appreciate the significance of these issues we'll be tackling today when it comes to indoor air quality for biodefense. In a very parochial way, I am very pleased to know that several speakers from my home state of Pennsylvania will be presenting today to share their invaluable perspectives. You know, once a gov, always a gov, I guess. As a former governor of Pennsylvania, I'm particularly eager to hear from our distinguished speakers from the Keystone State, Dr. Christopher Sales, Dr. Catherine Orlau, whose groundbreaking work is at the forefront of improving indoor air quality. Our collective endeavor to address this pressing issue is a testament to the innovative spirit that thrives within our communities. It reflects our unwavering commitment to public health, biodefense, and the well-being of our citizens. Together, we will explore the latest advancements and strategies that promise to transform our buildings into havens of health and safety. Thank you to all of our esteemed panelists today, and I look forward to hearing your remarks. And I'm looking forward to this opportunity to work with you. So I'm back to you, Donna.
Thank you very much, Tom. Now I'd like to invite this meeting's co-chair, Representative Greenwood, to make some opening statements. Jim?
Thank you, Donna. Good morning, everyone. We stand at the threshold of a new era in public health and biodefense. Good morning, everyone. We stand at the threshold of a new era in public health and biodefense, where the air we breathe indoors is as critical to our safety as any other security measure we put in place. The air within our homes, offices, and public spaces is a shared resource, a common good that demands our stewardship. It is our duty to ensure that this essential resource is not a vector for disease, but a bastion of health. Our goals are clear: to harness the latest advancements in science and technology, to develop policies that promote clean and safe indoor air, and to implement strategies that will protect people from the risks of airborne pathogens where they live and where they work. As with most everything to do with biodefense, we must be proactive, not reactive, in our approach to indoor air quality. The challenges we face are opportunities to demonstrate our resolve, our ingenuity, and our commitment to the well-being of all. We must be willing to explore new frontiers in air purification, to invest in research and development, and to educate the public on the importance of indoor air quality. Today, I'm interested in hearing about the scientific and technological aspects of our challenge, but also the human impacts, the lives that will be improved, the illnesses that will be prevented, and the peace of mind that will be secured. Our discussions today will revolve around the science of air quality, the innovations in pathogen transmission reduction, and the policies that will shape our collective defense against airborne threats. We must also recognize the importance of collaboration across disciplines and sectors. The challenge of indoor air quality is multifaceted, drawing upon multiple fields such as architecture, engineering, environmental science, and public policy. It requires a concerted effort from all stakeholders, government agencies, private industry, academic institutions, and nonprofit organizations to develop comprehensive solutions. They need to be forward-thinking, drawing upon the latest research and best practices to create environments that are not just safe, but conducive to health and productivity. Today marks a significant step as we join together to tackle this crucial mission. I want to thank all of our speakers for their commitment to this vital cause, and I'm looking forward to the innovative ideas and solutions that will emerge from our dialogues.
Dr. Hamburg?
Well, thank you very much. I think this is a very important session, and it's one we've wanted to undertake as a commission for a while now, because many of the issues of indoor air quality and safety, I think, have been overlooked over now decades in terms of thinking about public health strategies, responses, and how to build in greater health protections into the infrastructure where we live, work, learn, and congregate. And I think that we've been able to put together a good session today that reflects what's going on across different sectors and different disciplines. And I think that one of the things that I, in particular, I always note when these meetings come together that I'm the only one sitting at the table that's never been elected to a position. Everybody yet. I guess president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, so that counts for something. But as a public health practitioner and medical provider, what interests me, especially in the context of building a more robust system for biodefense, is also thinking about how can we build more robust systems that we use every day to protect health, as we also ensure that we have systems and capacities in place to better protect us in a crisis. And I think addressing air quality is one such issue, and it has certainly demonstrated its role and its value. Strategies to protect indoor air quality over now many decades, but technologies have improved, understandings have improved, and we now have the opportunity to both link protective measures in terms of assuring quality with diagnostic measures to alert us if problems arise. And so I'm interested in that intersection in particular of the day-to-day capacities to promote healthier indoor environments, but also what we need to have in place to be able to recognize and rapidly respond to a crisis. So thank you very much for sharing your expertise, your important work, and for educating us on this topic.
Thank you, Peggy. Getting confirmed by the Senate may be far more difficult than getting elected. Representative Upton.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. There's no question that improving indoor air quality could act as an extremely effective non-pharmaceutical intervention and sidestep many social and behavioral hurdles such as poor vaccine uptake and mask usage. So today's hearing, talking about willing partners to work together, particularly I'm delighted that Dr. Green is here. ARPA-H is one of the initiatives that I worked on in my closing days of the Congress. President Biden had the very first meeting that was bipartisan in the Oval Office, and so excited that, in fact, we got the funding for it, and it's so important that we continue it in this next fiscal year. I'm not sure that Congress has done a lot in terms of reauthorizing funds, but certainly under a CR, it's going to continue. But we welcome your work that's there, and we just know how important this issue is, particularly as we look to the future in terms of what hazards might be there and present for all of us. So appreciate this hearing. Look forward to the give and take that we have, and to see what we can do to really promote this as a major issue in the years ahead. Thank you.
So we've now told you how much we know. We need to be educated. Yeah. So Dr. Green, we'll start with you.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Good morning, Congressman Upton, Secretary Shalala, Congressman Greenwood, Honorable Hamburg, Governor Ridge, and distinguished members of the Commission. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to address the Commission in my role as Program Manager at the Advanced Research Project Agency for Health, or ARPA-H, and thank you, Congressman Upton, for your role in the formation of ARPA-H. I bring my perspective as a former air quality engineer at the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, a former biology.
Dr. Green, if I can interrupt you, can people in the back hear her? Everybody can hear her? Okay.
I'll speak up as well. I bring my former perspective as an air quality engineer at the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, a former biology professor and member of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Microbiomes of the Built Environment, and a former biotech executive. I've been professionally focused on reducing indoor pathogen transmission for over 15 years, and I remain hopeful we'll live to see a future where our buildings act as speed bumps to slow pathogen spread instead of accelerating it. Achieving this vision is going to require collaboration between innovators, government, and industry. We need to develop and de-risk technologies and also cultivate incentive structures to ensure adoption and scale in the marketplace. ARPA-H is one example of how government can catalyze the required innovation and implementation. Today, I'm going to briefly explain what ARPA-H is and the initiatives that I'm leading there. ARPA-H's mission is to accelerate better health outcomes for everyone. The agency is disease and technology agnostic and has unique structures and legal authorities that allow it to function like a business, quickly, nimbly, and decisively. We're funded with discretionary appropriations independent of NIH. We're like DARPA's business model in that we provide catalytic investment to tackle challenging and audacious problems in human health. We are not a forever funder. At the end of the lifetime of our programs, they need to transition into the real world, which in our case is primarily the private sector. Program managers join the agency with a what-if vision, like, what if we could cure blindness? And in my case, what if indoor air was always safe and healthy? I appreciate the Commission's important work that outlines specific steps to help address this question, including the National Blueprint for Biodefense, the Apollo Report, and the Athena Agenda. I'll now describe two ARPA-H initiatives that align with the Commission's recommendation to reduce pathogen transmission indoors, to develop a functioning national biological detection system, and to integrate and improve biosurveillance. The first initiative, called Breathe, is a program centered on three technology pillars: detecting airborne pathogens indoors, assessing exposure risk, and responding to ensure building occupant health and safety. The first technology challenge is developing hardware, sensors that can autonomously, with no manual human intervention, achieve multiplex detection of up to 100 airborne bioagents. The second challenge is developing software to quantify exposure risk. This software will assess, for example, if influenza was circulating in this room, whether or not the viral load is at a high enough concentration to warrant some type of intervention. Third, we're funding a nationwide efficacy trial in real buildings to demonstrate that with the right air monitoring and risk assessment systems, we can respond with appropriate interventions to realize a 25% reduction in respiratory disease at a 10% return on investment. A sister initiative that ARPA-H has just announced, called ProMicrobe, aims to advance and apply sequencing methods to discover biomarkers that are predictive of unhealthy and high-risk indoor environments. The ultimate goal is for these biomarkers to be programmed into the Breathe biosensors, continually expanding the range of biothreats and bioagents monitored. Breathe and ProMicrobe are designed to work together to combat known biothreats today and to rapidly discover and protect us from unknown biothreats tomorrow. The vision is a future where buildings across the country and planet are equipped with biological detection and response systems. Imagine ubiquitous systems that operate like a thermostat, but rather than adjusting the temperature to make us comfortable, adjust pathogen loads to keep us healthy. I'm optimistic that ARPA-H, along with other catalytic funders, will successfully de-risk emerging technologies and lay the foundation for commercializing next-generation biosecurity solutions at scale. Thank you for your time today, and again for your important work that you're doing with this commission for our nation.
Thank you. Dr. Allen.
Thank you for the invitation, for your work, and for including this topic as part of the commission. We are in the sick building era, ushered in by a historic mistake in the 1970s with the promulgation of a standard that lowered ventilation rates in nearly every building we spend our time, and which represented a gross departure from earlier public health-focused higher ventilation targets. In 1859, Florence Nightingale emphasized the critical role of ventilation. Cleanliness and fresh air from open windows are the only defense a true nurse either asks or needs. Not long after, in 1893, and motivated by tuberculosis, a physician-scientist named John Shaw Billings proposed the first health-focused ventilation rate, 30 cubic feet per minute per person. In 1895, this health-focused 30 CFM per person was adopted by a standards organization, American Society of Heating and Ventilation Engineers, ASHV. By 1925, 22 states required a minimum of 30 CFM per person. Thus, health-focused ventilation rates became the foundation for building design until a monumental and costly pivot away from health in the 1970s. In 1973, ASHRAE, the standard-setting body that followed ASHV, released a new standard for ventilation, ASHRAE 62. The earlier 30 CFM per person health-focused targets were lowered by half or more and were based in part on the ventilation required to control odors from human bioeffluents. The departure from earlier public health-focused ventilation to lower acceptable ventilation targets based on odor control marks the birth of the sick building era. The sick building era, unsurprisingly, caught the attention of researchers and spawned an entire field of study on indoor environmental quality. Scientific research studies documented higher ventilation rates associated with better math and reading scores in students, fewer missed school days for kids, fewer worker absences, lower risk of respiratory disease transmission, higher cognitive function test scores, and better workplace performance. Lawrence Berkeley National Lab estimated there were over $20 billion in benefits to the U.S. economy with improvements to ventilation. Despite the accumulated research on health and economic benefits of higher ventilation rates, not much changed, and the standard for minimum acceptable ventilation rates remained the basis for many building codes. The year 2020 marked a major turning point in the history of ventilation. The SARS-CoV-2 virus, spread predominantly indoors, found an ally in buildings designed to minimal acceptable ventilation standards. As early as February 2020, researchers raised concern over airborne transmission and highlighted that enhanced ventilation and filtration were key control strategies. In April 2020, ASHRAE also made recommendations for increasing ventilation. Yet in all these recommendations, there was a glaring omission. There were recommendations made to increase ventilation rates, but no standard-setting body was willing to offer a recommended target ventilation rate. This omission left many organizations grappling with how much clean air was recommended to safeguard against the virus. In late 2020, the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force convened a group of experts and then gave them an explicit task of making recommendations on ventilation rate targets. This group recommended ventilation rates that exceeded the minimum acceptable ventilation rates and estimated that their proposed new targets would reduce SARS-CoV-2 transmission by 70%. These recommendations were presented to the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force in 2021, but the recommended higher ventilation rates were never released or shared with the public. In the fall of 2022, the Lancet COVID-19 Commission released a report with recommended clean air rates for reducing exposure to airborne respiratory diseases. The Lancet Task Force, which I chaired the Task Force on Safe Schools, Safe Travel, recommended a good, better, best approach and designated 30 CFM per person as best. This report also revealed to the public for the first time the previously unreleased recommendations made by ASHRAE's internal committee. The Lancet report was timed to coincide with the first ever White House Summit on Indoor Air Quality, and it was shared with the White House Office of Pandemic Response and the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy. Shortly thereafter, ASHRAE announced they would produce a health-focused ventilation standard within 6 months. In June 2023, and 1 month after the official declaration of the end of the emergency phase of the pandemic, ASHRAE released ASHRAE Standard 241, Control of Infectious Aerosols, wherein they recommended a total clean air target more in line with historical public health-focused ventilation rates. Inexplicably, the standard was tempered by the inclusion of an on-off switch in the guidelines, what they call risk management mode, which suggested that enhanced ventilation could be discretionary and that baseline levels of influenza, COVID-19, and other respiratory diseases, which for influenza alone, CDC estimates result in up to 41 million illnesses since 2010, were somehow not worthy of being declared a full-time risk. We're at a precipice. The World Health Organization has declared clean indoor air a fundamental human right, and ventilation is a key component of ensuring clean indoor air. The current standards governing our ventilation rates are not based on health and haven't been for decades. There does seem to be alignment forming on health-focused ventilation targets. A group of over 40 international experts wrote a commentary in Science in March 2024 proposing indoor air quality standards wherein they recommend 30 CFM per person, the same target recommended by the Lancet COVID-19 Commission and the same public health-focused ventilation target used 100 years ago. The lessons from our past combined with recent experiences present an unambiguous call to action to recommit to ventilation, not just as a technical standard for minimally acceptable conditions, but as a cornerstone of public health. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Shea.
Yeah, first I want to thank the Commission for the invitation today. I'm pretty honored to be here today. My name is Christopher Salas. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Civil, Architectural, and Environmental Engineering. and also the director of the Applied Plasma Biology and Chemistry Lab at the C&J Nieheim Plasma Institute at Drexel University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So my expertise is in applied environmental microbiology, as well as applied plasma technologies. But my involvement in indoor airborne pathogen research didn't start until April 2020, as you can all imagine. I got an email to meet with the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, SEPTA, as people know it in Philadelphia region, on a virtual video conference call because there was an immediate drop in ridership. There's a lot of fear to ride in public mass transit. So they wanted to figure out how to convince the public that there is that it could be safe to ride public transportation again. So with the other researchers at Drexel, we developed the SEPTA Drexel partnership, and the researchers at Drexel had expertise in microbiology, risk assessment, indoor air quality, CFD or computational fluid dynamics related to ventilation, plasma technologies, epidemiology, and infectious diseases. And a part of that partnership, we targeted Federal Transit Administration, FTA, funding opportunity that was released in the fall of 2020. And that opportunity was really looking at how to help the transit agencies deal with COVID-19 and the fall in ridership. And so together we put together a proposal entitled Mass Transit Vehicle Air Ventilation and Purification Technologies Evaluation. We started this project and it was fortunately funded and started in 2021, and we plan to finish it at the end of this year. And we are looking at 4 different vehicle types, so bus, train, trolley, and subway systems. And so we worked closely with SEPTA to get information on their ridership. They also had information on masking compliance as well. And so we use expertise at Drexel to develop well-mixed models, as well as CFD models, to study transmission risks on these vehicles. We also are conducting lab testing of different disinfection technologies. So during COVID-19, there was a lot of technology, a lot of people, a lot of private companies selling technologies, but we didn't know if they were snake oil and how effective they might be. So there was some research done, during scares of anthrax and SARS earlier in the 2000s. But we looked specifically at ultraviolet light, UV, for instance, ultraviolet germicidal irradiation, or UVGI, bipolar ionization, as well as plasma technologies. And so our results, as our project is still ongoing, but we did complete some well-mixed model study on buses. And so a lot of transit agencies moved from MERV 8 filters to MERV 13 filters in the HVAC systems. But we also saw that it's really important how often and how consistent fans and HVAC systems are actually operated in those vehicles. For instance, compared to either 100% or 25% fan operation compared to no HVAC usage, there was about 10 to 100 times reduction in transmission compared to no HVAC using our well-mixed model. But we did see that because people are on buses for a very short time, it's a lot safer than indoor dining or maybe office work compared to other models and studies that are out there in the public literature. But we also noted that it's higher risk for operators as well than passengers on those buses. We're still conducting the CFD modeling, but it allows us to track particles. So these viruses or airborne pathogens travel as particles in the air. So we can use CFD modeling to see if there's any heterogeneity within the vehicles. So we can determine cases and scenarios when the risk might be higher than the well-mixed model cases that we developed and conducted. As far as the lab testing and disinfection technologies, we did create a lab-scale induct system. And in the test that we conducted in the small lab-scale systems, we did find that plasma was more effective than UV. We achieved about 2 to 3 log removal of viruses or phages with plasma, where we only got about 0.5 log removal with UV. There's one thing to note that these disinfecting technologies might not be safe for usage when occupants are in the vehicle. For instance, UV, there could be problems with eye and skin exposure. And then for plasma and bipolar ionization, there's also potential to produce ozone and other reactive oxygen species and other chemicals that might be unsafe to breathe. So those should be considered when trying to implement these technologies. Some other challenges are also, we have to conduct experiments at pretty high titers and high concentrations that are probably higher than what's really happening in vehicles. And so to be able to conduct, develop methods to detect these viruses at lower levels is really a big need. So I'll end there.
you.
My time is up.
Thank you very much.
If you're almost finished.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to acknowledge, we also had some other funding from National Science Foundation through the Industry University Cooperative Research Center at Drexel, which is related to plasma. So we looked at plasma air cleaning and different types of plasma technologies. We also developed some technologies through funding through the Defense Logistics Agency to look at using plasma-activated mist to disinfect N95 masks. In addition to federal funding, we also have some private funding, for instance, from Balvi, which is funded by the Ethereum co-founder, Vitalik Buterin. And so we're looking at far UVC 22 nanometer disinfection, but really looking at how we can use computational fluid dynamics to determine the best placement and design for these systems to help building designers know when best to use them and implement them.
Thank you. Dr. Green, let me take you back to 1976 in a hotel in Philadelphia, Legionnaire's disease. How would the systems that you're talking about have affected that situation?
The way that
Or would it be the standards that Dr. Allen's talking about?
The way that we've put together the Breathe program, we're requiring the end user to be at the table. And so in this case, it might be the hotel owners and operators, as an example. And
The security guys that have screens that may have the system in front of them too.
well, the reason we want the end user to be at the table and a performer as a part of the performing team is so that they can help define the product requirements and also the risk mitigation measures. So those entities will then define what kind of interventions do we want to have, what is our risk tolerance, what are the cost levels need to reach for us to actually adopt this technology.
Dr. Allen?
That's a great question. Legionella is caused by a bacteria that
Upper
is in
respiratory.
water that has to be aerosolized and inhaled. So L. Nemophila, mostly serogroup 1, is causing most of the disease. That outbreak, the original one at the American Legion, which is where the name came from, was unique in that it was spread through the HVAC system. Most of the Legionnaire's disease outbreaks that happen today happen from everyday aerosolation.
Right.
Could be from showers, could be from aerosolation from toilet water or sinks even. So the program, which I really love, ARPA-H, and what Dr. Green and everyone are doing here, in my view, would be able to detect that bacterium specifically and determine at what level is there a risk. Because right now we don't quite understand where the true risks are coming. Tens of thousands of people get Legionnaire's disease. Many die each year, and we just don't have a way to assess risk other than measuring it in water. We do not measure it in air or don't measure it in air very well.
Dr. Sales, you probably weren't alive in 1976, but if you want to comment.
No, but I'm in Philadelphia where that incident happened.
The Bishop Hotel is still there.
No, I think the University of Pennsylvania has taken over the area. But yeah, I think the work that Dr. Jessica Green with ARPA-H is doing to detect these pathogens is really important. A lot of technologies are based on molecular methods, measuring it with DNA and RNA, and a lot of those technologies aren't able to differentiate between live and dead pathogens. And so I think that's another area that we need to be able to increase the technology in science, so we can inform, get better information on how to manage things like Legionnaire's and other infectious diseases indoors.
Thank you. Dr. Hamburg.
Okay, well, thank you. Very interesting presentation. The number of thoughts going through my head. I guess one more technical issue I'd like to follow up on first, and then a bigger issue of how do we sort of set priorities and thinking about the application of new technologies and approaches. The first has to do with UV light. I mean, you indicated that in the smaller context of buses and trains, UV light has more shortcomings. It has some benefits, but it has risks in terms of other exposures, and doesn't perform as well as other approaches. I am wondering in the larger building. Oh, sorry. Do I need to start all over? I was asking about UV light, and the only comment about UV light that I at least remember hearing was in the context of Dr. Salas's presentation and smaller, more confined areas like buses or trains. I'm wondering if there could just be a little bit of commentary, perhaps Dr. Allen, you're the best one, about the role of UV light in other contexts, both larger buildings and congregate settings, but also I think UV light is used in air recycling on airplanes, for example, but that's a little different capacity than for buses, et cetera. But it's a technique that I'm familiar with from actually trying to manage TB in New York City in the 1990s when we had a significant resurgence, but found there wasn't as much information about appropriate use. Then during COVID, I tried to learn more about whether we should be introducing it, and again found there wasn't as clear guidance, but it looked to me as though it could have been of value if we had actually identified this as a priority.
Yeah, Dr. Allen, great question. I might have a different take than others in my field on the use of UV. First, it works. It can be very effective. I certainly support its use in high-risk environments like a TB ward, for example. I know this is a commission on biodefense, but there are, of course, many other issues that relate to indoor air beyond biological threats. And I think while UV is very effective at addressing biological threats, simpler strategies like ventilation filtration address multiple threats. So filters will capture respiratory particles as well as particles from wildfire smoke or other allergens. One of the concerns about UV is widespread use, outside of the potential occupational hazard if it's not maintained and operated correctly. There's new research showing that you can generate secondary respiratory hazards as you activate the air, so to speak. So I think it's a good technology. I think you have to be careful about how we deploy it and measure it and be mindful of the secondary pollutants that might be created. Last, when I think about something my mentor said, Dr. Jack Spangler years ago, he said, well, every generation's got something wrong, even in every field, including indoor air quality. And so it haunts me to think about what we might get wrong. And as I think, when we look out 10 or 20 years, something we might get wrong is the idea that we should be irradiating all the biologicals in the air all of the time at 20 to 30 or 40 air changes per hour. We know very little about the human microbiome and even less about the environmental microbiome. Thank you.
Well, a good caution, I think, and that's why we want to do more. Should I wait on a second question, or
Why don't you go ahead?
okay? Well, I guess starting perhaps with Dr. Green, what you are developing and describing, really is clearly highly desirable in as many settings as possible. But I also suspect that we have to think carefully about how to prioritize because of costs of the system. And also, of course, we want to make sure that the systems really work well in the context, because you're going to have some false positives that are going to have to be managed. And you're, of course, going to also have false negatives. But I'm wondering about how do you, as you've been designing your approach with Breathe, has it been with a particular size and type of facility in mind as the most cost-effective and appropriate place to use? Or do you see this eventually as becoming a ubiquitous kind of a system, potentially?
So the blue sky vision is that eventually this will be a ubiquitous type of system, but we've set up the program so that performing teams need to focus on one built environment type. And so this could be long-term care facilities, it could be schools, it could be hospitals, but they need to demonstrate by the end of the program this 25% reduction in at least one respiratory disease at a 10% return on investment. So we open it up for performing teams to select what facility types and applications they believe they could really have proof of concept for this. And proposals are due at the end of August. And so we really look forward to seeing, what we end up funding and all of the different ideas. But I imagine that there will be multiple built environment types that will be a part of the BREATHE program.
Well, thank you. That sounds like a really excellent, systematic way to approach this set of questions and to get real actionable data. So thank you.
Does anyone else want to comment on Dr. Hamburg's question? It was pretty specific to Dr. Green. Governor Ridge?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Gentlemen. Dr. Green, in your biography, you mentioned it is written that during the COVID-19 pandemic, you led the development of novel methods for more effectively monitoring airborne pathogens in large office buildings. Is this, I presume that was designed specifically to identify COVID? Is there a generic use to this approach once we know what the pathogen is? It's not ubiquitous.
So the way that the BREATHE program is set up is to autonomously detect up to 100 different bioagents. And the bioagents that performers are going to select will really be a function of the application and the facility type and the respiratory diseases that they're after. So we have opened BREATHE up to detecting not only pathogens, but also allergens. So again, the ultimate goal is to have a system that can detect viruses, bacteria, and we, allow performers to look at either fungi or allergens.
But truly ubiquitous. You say up to 100 different?
Yes. It's a moonshot at ARPA-H.
Yes, but are you aware of how many whether or not this approach has been embraced by like a builders association, by the national organizations responsible for construction of new buildings?
I have significant experience before coming to ARPA-H, working in industry with first movers that do care about healthy buildings and their occupants. And I've also experienced leaders that will be resistant to this. And for that reason, I am a strong advocate for de-risking technologies that will be at a low enough cost that they will be commercialized in the market at scale. This is my personal belief, not ARPA-H's, is that if we don't develop systems that will increase profitability of the entities that will buy these systems, they're not going to scale.
Can you envision a time where the regulatory environment to get approval for new construction includes mandates this, particularly in a multi-unit high-rise or some sort?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I'm sorry, it was not very well phrased. Given its extraordinary application, it would seem to me that if someone was looking to build a high-rise, multiple occupancy structure, that this is part of the building regulations, it would be included, mandated in the construction. Have you had any conversations with anybody in the building world, in the construction world, about mandating this?
I have had a lot of conversations with entities in the construction world, but anything involving the regulatory framework or mandating such systems is outside the purview of what we do at ARPA-H. We're focused on R&D at ARPA-H.
Dr. Allen, do you want to answer that one too?
I can add to it and support. Governor, great question. I think there's signs that the building industry will be receptive to this. We can look at what's happening right now with low-cost air quality sensors that don't measure biologicals, but measure other indicators of indoor air quality like carbon dioxide and particles. So for example, right at Harvard, we are measuring indoor air quality with real-time sensors at Harvard School of Public Health, Harvard Business School, and the Harvard Health Clinics. I advise Amazon, they have rolled out an indoor air quality system globally to their corporate offices, measuring these indicators of indoor air quality. Boston Public Schools is measuring indoor air quality in all of its classrooms. Denver Public Schools doing the same. There are several bills that are being promoted in different cities and states that are looking to implement real-time indoor air quality monitoring in schools, offices, other public buildings. So I say that as that there is certainly movement in this space. I think what ARPA-H will do is advance this to be sure that this includes monitoring for biological threats. And I'll tie it back to my opening remarks. For this to benefit everyone everywhere, it has to get tied into standards.
Well, it's very encouraging. Thank you both.
Yeah, Dr. Sales, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's researchers at Drexel. We're trying to figure out how to take that data from those sensors and to input them into building information systems so those building managers can use that data wisely and to make interventions if necessary. But the challenge is often going to be, how sparse the data might be from these sensors. And if we can integrate other types of modeling, whether it's AI modeling or meta modeling, to help kind of make up for the sparse data that might happen from as these technologies start to develop.
Governor, any other questions?
Chairman, I've got a doctor's appointment. I want to, first of all, thank all those who are appearing before this group today and apologize for leaving prematurely, but I've got an appointment I have to keep. Excuse me.
Thank you.
There you go. Thank you all.
He has to check his own.
Sounds like he needs to get there pretty quickly.
Yeah. Representative Upton.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to again thank all of you for your testimony. As I said in my opening remarks, I was one of the early leaders behind ARPA-H, and we had plenty of meetings and hearings how it ought to be structured and being nimble and really getting the job done and moving on, very much like patterning after DARPA. That was our model, and I'm excited to hear about the Breathe program and the way that you've set it up in terms of sensor software, detection, access risks, and responding. In my time as chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we dealt with a lot of different issues, and it was often when we looked at new standards, whether it be appliance energy efficient standards, building standards, water heater standards, all those things, it was often the industry, some partners in industry, they would look as it impacted their bottom line. But you look at the construction folks and it was like, this is going to cost more. We're not going to have as many permits. So we're not going to go forward. How receptive, and this sort of builds on what Governor Ridge said, how receptive has the industry been in terms of, hey, it's 100 years, as you said, Dr. Allen, it's been 100 years since the standard has changed. I mean, talk about a wake-up call in terms of what we've seen, obviously, with COVID, but, these going back, as you said, Chairman Shalala, back to the Legionnaire's disease. I mean, it's been decades. Where are we in terms of real outreach and ability by the industry folks to say, it's time for a change. We can really make a difference and save lives. And is there some, as we look at energy efficiency, so you look at LEED standards and things that are almost commonplace now, where is there sort of a good housekeeping seal of approval that might be receptive across the board in all 50 states? What work has been done on that?
So
And
that was a
congratulations, by the way, for moving forward on this. It's just another reason why ARPA-H needs to continue.
So that was a multi-part question, but I think the first part of the question was how receptive is industry to making the change for healthy buildings. And I believe one outcome of the Breathe program that may help is this requirement that the performing teams calculate the return on investment for these systems. And we're asking or encouraging teams to calculate this return on investment using a triple bottom line analysis. So it includes it from the point of view of the profitability to the building owner, but also including the environmental, so the societal cost of carbon and the health impacts. And I'm optimistic that once it's demonstrated that we can have a positive impact on indoor air quality, and there is a significant return on investment, that seeing that proof of concept may help turn the tides with regards to the appetite of industry to do the right thing and make indoor air quality healthy.
And Dr. Allen, just to, I'd like you to respond to that, but also, you were able to cite a whole number of different public building spaces, as you just did in the previous question. Has there been some acknowledgement by, I'm thinking, state legislatures or others? There's been some movement that, hey, this is really positive, and maybe we ought to look at some of these minimum standards as well.
Yes, sir. There's a lot of movement. Actually, it's happening internationally with different groups of scientists who are discussing this. There's stuff happening at the national level, city scale, related to changing standards. In response to your earlier question around, is the business community ready for this? I think receptivity is high. COVID was a wake-up call, represented existential risk. So I was been in the healthy building space for 20 years. That was the first time we really got into the C-suite. Became a C-suite issue. And now that's not going away. Right? Air quality is front of mind. In terms of the benefits as it relates to biothreats, there's been a lot of work on the ROI on good indoor air quality already. I wrote a book called Healthy Buildings with John McCumber, a professor at Harvard Business School, an expert in real estate finance. We talk about some of our studies on better cognitive function. We estimate the benefit is $6,000 to $7,000 per person per year with improved indoor air quality for workers. Rolled up to a business, 10% gains to the bottom line based on productivity and reduced illness, absenteeism. And our colleagues at MIT down the road showed a 4 to 7% increase in the price per square foot. So it's good investment decision. And I've already mentioned the macroeconomic benefits from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab of over $20 billion. The short answer here is I'm a professor of public health. My interest is in public health. Healthy buildings are also just good business. I suspect we'll see the same from Dr. Green's work.
Dr. Still, just a last question for you. This a little bit of a personal one. I'm one that rides mass transit, okay? And both bus and the metro system here. You talk a little bit about UVs. I have ultraviolet. I have it at my house. Are they using UV here in the metro system or bus systems here for air quality?
Not that I know of.
Are there some transit organizations that in fact do in terms of recirculating the air on those buses or metro systems?
Not that I know of. I think there's some that have been testing, not when the occupants are in the buses, but maybe for cleaning after when the buses, or even on different surfaces, but not really for indoor air cleaning when occupants are actively in the vehicle.
Hospitals. Okay. Thank you.
And that thought it wasn't.
Airplanes use a 50-50 mix of outdoor air and recirculated air. All the recirculated air goes through HEPA filters. It's called bleed air. It's bled off the engine. You get outdoor air bled with bleed air off the engines with the 50% recirculated through HEPA filters. You probably get anywhere from 12 to 20 air changes per hour on an airplane. For reference, typical home in the United States gets about half an air change per hour. Our schools are designed for 3 air changes per hour, but it's a design standard. Most schools are down at 1.5 to 1 air changes per hour. Our recommendation from the Harvard Healthy Buildings program during the early days of the pandemic was 4 to 6 air changes per hour, just for reference.
Thank you.
Representative Underwood.
Underwood, the guy from TV show, I think. That's why
His first name was Fred. His first name was Fred. Had the same initials.
Anyway, Dr. Green, you're probably familiar with the BioWatch program that was instituted after 9/11. It has detectors in some 30 cities, high-populated cities. It's very clunky. This commission has thought it's not a very good system, needs to be replaced. So my question is, I don't know if it makes any sense or not, but if you're looking at being able to detect 100 different kinds of pathogens, would it have this similar value? I mean, could a system like this detect pathogens that are outdoors as well as indoors? I assume that's the case. And could it possibly stand as a highly decentralized BioWatch system?
What's something that really differentiates Breathe from the BioWatch goals, or a significant part of the BioWatch goals, is that we're totally focused on indoor air quality. I believe it may be possible downstream to engineer the biosensors developed for Breathe to outdoor systems, and it's harder. I think there's different technical challenges associated with indoor air biosensing and outdoor air biosensing, but as an example, something that indoor air sensors won't need to navigate are the extreme variation in outdoor temperature and wind and things like that. But there is a vision, and I said this during my 5-minute narrative, of having ubiquitous Breathe-like systems in buildings across the nation and world. And I believe that coupled with something like Pro-Micro, where we're going to have full sequencing of air samples and indoor environmental samples, this really could serve as a biosurveillance system to be coupled with other types of biosurveillance, like wastewater surveillance.
Well, this shows my ignorance, but isn't all of the air that's in this building right now come originally from outside?
Yeah. Yes, it does come from outside. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it would seem to me if there were pathogens outside of this building and we had detectors inside this building, that we ought to be able to detect that which is outside.
Yes, I believe that it would be possible, again, to transition the technology to outdoor environments, but the real goal of the program is indoor air quality.
I understand. Dr. Allen, in order to optimize the indoor airspace air quality, is this more a function of new construction, or is it a function to, if you want to be optimized, with retrofitting existing buildings, and to what extent is that more or less challenging?
Yeah, that's a great question, Representative Greenwood. There's a misunderstanding out there, misperception that it's only the new shiny buildings that can be healthy buildings. We need to debunk that, and we need to debunk it fast. The reality is any building can be a lot healthier. I've done, again, 20 years of doing forensic investigations of sick buildings. I've seen the worst of the worst, where people have died in buildings due to poor indoor air quality. There's never been a building we couldn't turn into a healthy building with just a little bit of attention. That is the truth. During the COVID pandemic, the Lancet COVID-19 Commission, I had the honor of chairing one of their task forces with many excellent scientists from around the world. We put out a report called The First 4 Healthy Building Strategies Every Building Should Pursue. First is commission your building. That's giving your building a tune-up like we do for our cars. We don't do that for our buildings. That's to bring them back up. Then increase ventilation, enhance filtration to MERV 13 or higher, include portable air cleaners, have real-time sensors in place, and other technology. This is not expensive. In fact, that first step of commissioning, the ROI on that's just a couple of years, because you save energy, you improve indoor air quality. It's also good for our climate goals. So there's a lot of these strategies that are actually quite simple that can be deployed in any existing building, and that's schools, offices, multifamily apartments, offices, just about anywhere.
Thank you. And Dr. Sales, is that the right pronunciation of your name?
It's Solace.
Solace. Okay. Peggy got it right then. All right. My question for you is a question of proximity. So when we're trying to minimize the spread of a disease from a pathogen, if I was heavily if I had COVID here, would my friends to the left and right be able to be protected, or is they just too close? And so, what sort of proximity does this kind of
Yeah, I think there's
technology
multiple, lines of defense. There's ventilation, the filtration system that can control the movement of those pathogens indoor. And so definitely proximity matters as far as how far those aerosols can move. But being knowledgeable and proactive, and maybe not having yourself, if you're infected, be in this space would be a good idea. But also if there is another pandemic, the wearing of masks also is efficient as well. So it really depends on the case. But really in these indoor environments, even smaller environments like buses or train cars, the ventilations can be pretty high, and so the risk could be fairly low. But there is, proximity does matter to how far you are from the infectious person.
Thank you.
Let me go to the ex officios, see if Dr. Twanjabi has a question.
I do. Thank you, Chair. I have one for Dr. Allen and one for Dr. Green. Just for Dr. Green, the BREATHE program has this ROI component, which is exciting because, like you mentioned, that could help take proven technologies to scale. In every pandemic, epidemic, risk is not equally distributed. There are going to be places like daycare centers. Maybe there's smaller family-owned daycare centers. There are going to be public schools that may not be able to afford the technologies that come online and go to scale. Curious, I'm sure you're thinking about that, and I'm curious about how that's factoring into your current proposal and RFP process. Will you be thinking about long-term facilities that may not be able to afford public schools, preschools, that may not be able to afford that technology, and are there business models that could work or affordability models that could work? For Dr. Allen, I want to ask you about public demand. You know, when fireproofing and flood-proofing buildings has really taken place over the last several decades, fires and floods are very visible threats. Biothreats are less visible. My sense is that the public's demand and pressure for pandemic proofing or biothreat proofing buildings has decreased in this sort of post emergency phase of COVID. How important is public demand? I know you're to push for the standards you've been calling for, and are there, one or two key messages that you've found are effective but not being amplified sufficiently that public leaders could amplify further?
So I'll answer your question first. Again, we designed BREATHE to ensure that these technologies are going to be equitably accessible, which includes both costs and user experience. And we really did everything we could to recruit to the program. As an example, long-term care facilities. We'll see, how that unfolds. But I think that it's, again, to scale these technologies and derive the benefit, we have to make them affordable, and also systems that are really going to work for that application. So in long-term care facilities, as an example, we're going to need systems that do not have any affiliated operational costs and get in the way of people working in those facilities doing their job. And as another element of what we're considering is how these systems may be deployed internationally. So we know that pathogens have no boundaries, and it's going to be important to develop systems where we can detect biothreats, not only here in the United States, but in other places in the world where cost may be a considerable factor.
So the really good question. I don't think the public's going to forget about this anytime soon. I mean, the fact that this commission exists and having a session on Masters of the Air, and the White House had a summit on indoor air quality is still shocking to me in a great way. I never thought I'd see it. But 60 Minutes just covered this topic. The New York Times has had at least three-part series on this, including a front page for those of us that read physical papers, above the fold, A1. The new war on bad air, talking about the new war on bad indoor air. So, and the other thing I think that's happening is that there's a proliferation of low-cost air quality sensors. It used to be the case, you come into a room like this, you don't know how it's performing. Now these sensors, some are under $100. You can come in here and you'll tell the owner of this building or your boss, hey, the air quality is bad and I can show you why. In fact, people are sharing this kind of information on social media, shaming, in some cases correctly, some of the businesses they visit, saying the air quality here is not good and I can show you why. So that's going to change things quickly. That has changed the power dynamic. It used to be you hire a scientist, take a measurement, maybe write a report, gets buried. Now the public has access to that information. When it comes to the messaging that I think we need to think about, I think we should talk about the public health gains we've had over the past 100 years. We have made incredible gains related to food safety, sanitation, water quality. Where has indoor air been in that conversation? 90% of our breaths happen indoors. We've ignored it. We should expect the air in our buildings to be clean, just as we expect clean water coming out of our taps. That's a message I think will resonate with the public.
I would point out, though, that we didn't completely ignore it. When we eliminated smoking in buildings, it did have some impact on cleaning up at least the air vent system.
Incredible public health accomplishment, of course. And we've seen that in our buildings, and we see it in the health data. And I think one of the things that turned the tides there, you know best, is this turned into a worker health and safety issue, right? It wasn't about individual freedoms. It was about, well, you're making secondhand smoke is causing someone else to be sick. So I think that's a great profile. That is probably, if not the biggest public health win we've had related to indoor air over the past several decades. I think we're on the precipice of the next major public health win, which is about the severe burdens of infectious disease transmission indoors.
Could you go back to the airline safety issue, and because the politics of that was also related to tobacco as well, and that was also seen as a worker issue. Can you talk a little bit about the interface of that, and because that's our real star?
Yeah. So one of the main reasons we have high ventilation rates and good filtration on airplanes was to mitigate the issue of smoke and smoking in airplanes, which thankfully is no longer the case. And so what you have, I was the lead author on a National Academy's report 10 years ago on infectious disease transmission in airplanes and in airports. And in that, we talk about the high ventilation filtration mitigating the risk of disease transmission on airplanes. It can happen, but fortunately, it's low. You have high ventilation rate, good filtration, and high ventilation effectiveness. The air is delivered to each person. That is an underappreciated aspect of good indoor air quality. But we also highlighted that report, and right at the beginning of the pandemic, there are periods that are higher risk, particularly during boarding, when the airline should be running ventilation while the airplane is at the gate. Our research has found that is not always the case. And if you look at the data, and people will show the real-time monitors of CO2 levels in airplanes during boarding, you will see 2,000, 3,000 parts per million. They're not running gate-based ventilation. We identified that as the highest risk part because during cruise, you get the 20 air change per hour of clean air. So that ultimately, that's an area that needs to be addressed. And actually, there's a regulation requiring gate-based ventilation. But I think the data shows it's not always happening.
Raj, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have another question?
They covered it well. Thank you.
Dr. Hamburg.
Well, thank you. I want to follow up on the public health question, but also reveal my ignorance so you can educate me on some of the sort of regulatory context, governance issues. First, I just want to underscore, the impact of air quality on human health. I think this was an excellent exchange about, smoking prevention, but I was just looking at numbers yesterday on cardiovascular health and small particulate matter exposures, and it's several 100 million deaths a year worldwide that could be prevented, as I understand it, in terms of cardiovascular disease. So I was blown away by that, and it reminds us that not all biological threats that we should be caring about are microbial in nature, even ones that might be deliberately used to cause harm, as, forest fires, for example, has been talked about as a possible terrorism mechanism, as well as, Mother Nature at work, and the exposures around the world and the value of building systems that, as I mentioned in my earlier comments, that protect people day in, day out, as well as in a crisis. In your comments, Dr. Allen, you referred to, I think it was ASHRAE, and I don't know what ASHRAE is, and I probably should, but is it a governmental oversight body? Is it a private sector assessment tool? What is it?
Yeah, so it's a great question. You have a speaker coming later today from ASHRAE. You can ask them about that and all their standards, but they're a non-governmental organization that sets a lot of great standards, volunteer organization. And one of the areas that I've been focused on that I believe is deficient is one of their standards that is, by name, standard for acceptable indoor air quality. I think the standard should be the standard for healthy indoor air quality. Related to your comment on cardiovascular disease, I think it's really important because these particles, the filters that capture respiratory particles for infectious disease also captures, the fine particulate matter. And this will shock you, and it's related to this discussion we're having on standards in indoor air quality. So the EPA just lowered the standard for PM 2.5 for outdoors. That's a criteria air pollutant. It went from 12 microgram per cubic meter to 9. Do you know what the standard is for indoor air quality? The only legally enforceable standard for PM 2.5 indoors. It's set by OSHA, and it's 5,000 micrograms per cubic meter. EPA just lowered it to 9 because of the cardiovascular disease risk. And on top of that, we know particulate matter is associated with mental health, anxiety, depression, dementia, Alzheimer's disease. And we don't have standards, legally enforceable standards for indoor air quality. We have a few, and they're outdated, and largely it's regulated by OSHA. The standard for PM 2.5 is 5,000 micrograms per cubic meter, and the EPA just lowered it for the outdoors to 9.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Let's go, Dr. Lemons.
Thank you very much. I have a question for you that will also be relevant to the panel coming next, representing industry, and it has to do with the uptake of the results of the work that you're doing right now. As you know, this commission writes recommendations and suggestions to the federal agencies, and this is an opportunity for you to speak about what you think needs to be done to encourage the uptake of the results of the work. So I know ARPA-H, for example, has PATIO, transition office, to make sure that the results of your research can survive in the wild. But there are many many ways that can work or not work, and it would be really awful for the country if those the results don't get reflected into whatever the requirements are, whether it's federal, state, and local. So what suggestions would you have for making sure that transition takes place effectively?
That question.
This is really for all of you.
Okay.
Because you're all in positions where this is important.
Yeah, I mean, so for our project with SEPTA, we're definitely working with vehicle engineers and trying to find literature that they're common and venues where where they might see this information. So we've definitely written, scientific peer-reviewed publications, but we want to be able to translate that to those vehicle engineers, the building engineers, so they can practically use that information that we gain from the scientific studies. So those are important things that we're considering doing.
The way that we approach this for Breathe, I like that you know PATIO. The way we've approached this for Breathe, I think it was very unconventional, where, again, we required, as a part of the performing team, to be the end user who would ultimately be purchasing and adopting these technologies. And so that's what we thought was the most promising path to transitioning the technology, is to get the eventual buyer at the table, so that at the very beginning, and we even set 6 months at the beginning of the program, where these teams can be really defining product requirements, cost requirements, everything. And I'm, again, optimistic that by having the end user at the table to set the product requirements and system requirements, that's going to grease the wheels for tech transition and commercialization.
Dr. Troy?
Yes, thank you for those excellent presentations. I have a question for each panelist, and that is, which pathogen are you most concerned about? And are you most concerned about a foreign or domestic source of that? And are you most concerned about man-made or natural?
Let's start with that.
Well, I think based on the reports that I've read from the commission and also our own research, I mean, influenza is an area where we can really make a big difference today and have a material effect on mortality and morbidity, not only in the U.S., but globally. So I believe that respiratory infections from influenza are around like the 4th leading cause of death in the United States. And so that's an area where I'm optimistic we can have a big impact.
It's a dangerous question. I agree on influenza. I think tuberculosis has been ignored globally. But I want to also point out that all of the recommendations we've made, and I make continually, are recommendations that address multi-threat. So good ventilation filtration will address all of these pathogens. And it doesn't have to be that we name or even pick one. Some of the reasons in my view, why we need to establish some of these new healthy building standards is to make sure that the baseline functioning of our buildings is protective against all respiratory pathogens, regardless of which one is the most important today, which one is the most important in the U.S. versus elsewhere, or which one is the next one that will bite us, because there will be a next one.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there was a single pathogen to focus on. I think there's a lot of variability due to seasons, just like influenza, for instance, but even COVID-19, though, it seems to be around all the time. So it's hard to, put a finger on which one would be the one to focus on. I think we need to be able to develop technologies, like Dr. Allen said, on multiple threats.
Thank you. Let me thank this extraordinary panel for educating us and for your service to this country and really to improving health for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyway, for this panel, we have first Melissa Baker, who's the Senior Vice President, Technical Development for the U.S. Green Building Council. We have Catherine Warlow. Dr. Catherine Warlow is the founder and CEO of Life Air Systems. And we have Alice Yates, who's the Director of Government Affairs, the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And we thank you again for being with us. And we'll start with you, Ms. Baker.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us, and thank you for convening this group. Is it working?
Trying to green.
There we go. Is that working? Okay, good. I head up technical development.
So about green.
Yeah, exactly. It's in the name, isn't it? So we're the U.S. Green Building Council. We founded USGBC about 30 years ago with the mission of really driving market transformation for better buildings. We have goals around health, decarbonization, ecological conservation, resilience, and of course, social equity. So I wanted to bring today a perspective from the building industry and the ways that we've been able to test various indoor air quality strategies in iterative versions of our rating system, which is known as LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And we've been running LEED for more than 2 decades. So my first recommendation is really related to technological innovation. So we've seen an emergence of low-cost wireless sensors over the last 10 years. It's made it much more feasible to measure indoor environmental quality continuously in buildings, especially during routine operations. And this capability has a potential to address a huge gap, which is that we have quite a lot of design and construction strategies for indoor air, and those are prescribed often by building code, but not really any requirements to check indoor air quality during operations and to really make sure that that design intent is being met and that we are finding any faults or unforeseen conditions. So we're seeing a demand and market readiness for that performance-based continuous air operational monitoring for an operational indoor air quality standard around that. And we really want to support collective efforts to cross that chasm from the current state of R&D going to at-scale implementation with benefits for both public health and biosecurity if thoughtfully designed. We've laid a lot of groundwork towards that end state with our organizations. We have a Center for Green Schools. They're working with many school districts to implement sensors and expanding options for sensing in the latest version of LEED, which is out now in draft. That's our version 5. We're working with an expert advisory group on a research from UC Berkeley, EPFL, the University of Sydney, and that paper will be a study to identify and bridge practical barriers to sensor implementation. And of course, I know you heard earlier about the ARPA-H Breathe program.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yoga class will commence shortly.
That's such a good choice.
I didn't realize you were into heavy metal.
So anyway, ARPA-H, I know you heard a lot about it, but really want to continue to support. There's just a large boost in funding and biosensor development, and that increases the capability for that real-time surveillance, diagnostics, and response. So for a second recommendation, this is something we talk a lot about at USGBC and with LEED, to really think holistically across the building systems. Our certifications range from interiors to whole buildings, new and existing. We also work at cities and the neighborhood scale. We're in 180 countries and have 110,000 certified commercial projects. So we've operated LEAD for over 20 years, and we really think of it as a testing ground for a lot of these ideas. We're rewarding projects. We've really learned a lot about the value of looking at indoor air quality, but alongside things like climate change from a mitigation and adaptation perspective, ecological conservation, and quality of life. So why does that matter? Why should we be holistic? We really want to anticipate and manage any unintended consequences, certainly managing risk. We want to look at how, if you look at different parts of the system in isolation, you may not, be able to manage that risk. It's really important that we consider and plan for building stock, climate, and building use conditions that we're headed toward, rather than looking back at historical data or current conditions. And another critical piece, and I know that's a big part of what you all focus on, is that we want to avoid missed opportunities. We want to address as many goals as we can in tandem, of course, biodefense, but also can we find solutions for defense against extreme weather events, reducing inequity or exposure to vulnerable populations, and bringing in thoughtful design. And then finally, a very pragmatic reason is looking at where the funding is flowing. Certainly things like decarbonization and climate change mitigation has a lot of momentum and funding behind it, while IAQ may be less resourced. So could we integrate IAQ goals during decarbonization? I know that's something that ASHRAE will be speaking about. We have staff on the committee. We reference the ASHRAE standards. So we want to continue to support those collective efforts. And then finally, I think a lot of why we're all here today, we want to continue to foster strategic partnerships and engage those communities that we seek to protect. There are a lot of entities and organizations doing important work in indoor air quality. This panel is a great step towards building that connectivity. We have a wide range of building professionals as our members. We have project teams, expert volunteers, partners. We want to continue to bring in public health, medical providers, and community groups with that on-the-ground knowledge and the ability to position and drive proper implementation. So we hope that that connectivity can be built in both directions, so commercial, residential, schools, healthcare, and other buildings can benefit from new technologies and the processes developed for biodefense. Thank you.
Before I begin, I'd like to congratulate and thank all on the Bipartisan Biodefense Commission, as well as my fellow panelists, for your tireless work, positive steps, and progress towards making biosecurity a national priority for all in our great country. We're truly humbled and honored to be a part of this critical discussion. My recommendation to our commissioners comes from a place of professional and therefore deeply personal experience, from a place of both pain and loss in not having or meeting adequate or optimal indoor air quality metrics. Allow me to explain. As a reproductive physiologist and former clinical provider of in vitro fertilization, or IVF, I never dreamed I would be as passionate about today's subject as I am. However, when low levels of chemical and biological airborne pathogens impact the level of patient care that you can offer as a provider, or in my case, the ability to help those hoping to fulfill their dreams of having a family. When low-level airborne pathogens negatively impact the very cell that you are trying to protect, the human embryo, you become very passionate. We, as many IVF programs, suffered undulations in our clinical pregnancy rates. We learned the significance of indoor air quality from nearly 20 years of both positive and negative data. The presence of this airborne biological or the presence of this airborne chemical or volatile organic compounds equaled this negative impact on our clinical outcomes. The 20 years of negative data clearly defined the air metrics, if you will, the human embryo truly needed to be consistently and successfully cultured outside of the protective maternal environment. Once we identified these metrics, which fast forward are some of the same metrics that we're discussing today, those deemed optimal to protect our citizens in any setting. Once identified and defined, and given the now known clinical significance of not meeting these metrics, I was literally given a blank check by our hospital CEO to purchase an air purification system to deliver what we had been missing in our critical environment. I was shocked. There was nothing commercially available to deliver these now clearly defined airborne metrics. Not being able to remove or control indoor air quality as a variable in our process to take care of patients, now clearly understood as a vector of toxicity, this inability was both professionally and personally unacceptable. This is when I became passionate about air. For one reason, because without its comprehensive control, chemical and biological airborne pathogens, even at low levels, were negatively impactful to our patients, to the level of patient care that we could offer. This struck us at our very core. With no commercial solution available for purchase, there was only one path to consider: to design a solution. We knew from our negative data which filtration components did not deliver. We knew which filtration technologies produced ozone, intermediate molecules, byproducts. We knew which technologies allowed the continued growth and proliferation of biologicals above the very space that we were trying to protect. And because the technology was originally, and frankly, selfishly, designed to protect the human embryo, we set the design bar exceptionally high. To deliver below detection biologicals, bacteria, viruses, mold, fungi, as well as below detection chemical pathogens, again, your VOCs, but to deliver this on a single pass through the system. We didn't want the air to go through the system 5, 10, 25, 30 times to achieve this. We wanted whatever entered did not exit, and we wanted that accomplished without producing harmful byproducts. We chose the anthrax spore as our biological target, as it is one of the most difficult biologicals to kill. And if you're able to kill or eliminate the anthrax spore, you provide a 9-log kill remediation, 6-log being sterility, of all other airborne biologicals with which we are concerned: C. diff, MRSA, Pseudomonas, staph, strep, rubeola, TB, SARS-CoV-2 and its variants, and others. And finally, and most importantly to us in the design, was that the technology be vetted, tested, and proven during 24/7 live operations in a real-world setting, not in a defined, vacated chamber. It's critical to know how the technology delivers with functioning staff, patients, families, sneezing, breathing, coughing, protocols, SOPs. I cannot help but to view everything through my own lens as a clinical provider. What data, what testing, what validated proof would I need to see before remotely considering the use of any technology towards patient care? Now fast forward. Given the efficacy and success in the highly sensitive and demanding clinical space of IVF, and because of the proven anthrax kill, we were asked to conduct double-blinded, IRB-approved clinical settings in a fully operational acute care setting in healthcare and separately in senior living, asking the singular question: could the air purification technology as designed add to the effectiveness of HEPA filtration in reducing illness and infection? After a 12 and 15-month study, again, 2 large independent studies of over 8,255 adult med-surg patients and 75 senior residents, the short answer was yes. Each study demonstrating very similar results. By dramatically reducing or removing infectious airborne pathogens above that provided by HEPA filtration, a typically persistent and common vector of illness was removed. This removal resulted in a statistically significant reduction in healthcare-acquired infections, illness, staff call-outs, length of stay, obviously in healthcare, and as a result, improved economic metrics and productivity. From decades of research and experiencing the negative impact of low-level airborne pathogens, both biological and chemical, on health and wellness, relative to today's question and our level of biodefense readiness, I would ask the commissioners to require the same level of proof of effectiveness from any chosen technology. Number one, to match, if not exceed, the new ASHRAE 241 standards, and to ensure that they become an actionable code of compliance. Number two, to provide single-pass kill or elimination of infectious biological and chemical pathogens, and to do so with the proven production of zero byproducts. And finally, to be tested during real-world and fully operational settings over an extended period of time. Ensuring that an air purification technology meets these critical criteria will absolutely provide positive steps towards improved levels of biodefense for our nation's citizens. We continue to learn from our installed base in IVF, healthcare, senior living, commercial office spaces, airports, and soon sporting venues. We learn from their data and the ubiquity of the impact of improved and standardized indoor air quality metrics. We continue our clinical studies about the unseen yet negative and consequential impact of airborne pathogens, both biological and chemical, on health and wellness. It is for this reason, patient care, that we continue our work, our passion, continue to optimize and push the level of air purification technology. Again, we applaud the work of our fellow panelists, the commissioners who brought us here today to discuss this critical mission. We applaud the visionaries, our customers, and our partners who have embraced the significance of indoor air quality and its unforgiving and unyielding impact. And we thank each of you behind us for attending today's critical discussions, all towards making biosecurity a national priority for all in our great country. I thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Yates.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here today speaking before you. Secretary Shalala, Congressman Greenwood, Congressman Upton, and Dr. Hamburg. It is a pleasure and an honor, and it's an honor to be sitting with these colleagues. I'm especially delighted because you're bringing together disciplines from the building sector, from the public health sector, from the medical and clinical sectors, and this is not done often enough, so thank you. I also want to thank you for your National Blueprint report that includes an important recommendation to reduce pathogen transmission in built environments. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at ASHRAE, and Dr. Hamburg, I'd be happy to share more about who ASHRAE is. We are a global technical and professional society of over 54,000 members around the world. We're dedicated to advancing the arts and sciences of heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration to serve humanity and to promote a sustainable world. So we're a nonprofit made up of individuals, not like a trade association. Dr. Bill Bonfleth, who's a distinguished ASHRAE presidential member and chair of ASHRAE's Epidemic Task Force, as well as the chair of the project committee that developed the standard 241 that's been referenced a couple of times, control of infectious aerosols, was also invited but could not attend due to scheduling conflicts. Dr. Bonfleth's work has informed much of what is in this statement, and I'm so grateful for his expertise and leadership on IAQ and his extraordinary contributions as the world battled COVID-19. One of ASHRAE's key areas of focus is our development of standards, and these are different than the energy conservation standards that Congressman Upton referenced earlier. These are design standards and guidelines for the built environment. ASHRAE has over 100 active standards and guideline project committees addressing such broad areas as indoor air quality, energy efficiency, refrigerant safety, building decarbonization, and risk management for building water systems. And yes, we have a standard, Secretary Shalala, for Legionella. It's Standard 188. The people who serve on these committees are volunteers, and their work guides the industry. With respect to indoor air quality and preventing the spread of pathogens, it is instructive to note, and actually Dr. Allen referenced this before, that ASHV, which is a predecessor to ASHRAE, in 1895 produced its first ventilation standard, which was intended to reduce disease transmission, which is different than the standards that were developed in the 70s and 80s. Importantly, and with respect to government, since I'm a government affairs person, this standard was included in 22 U.S. state codes by 1922. Shifting to the 20th century, in 1973, ASHRAE created its standard for natural and mechanical ventilation, which was subsequently adopted by reference into building codes. That 1973 standard has been updated multiple times and has been separated into standards for commercial buildings and residential. I share this history because it reveals just how long our nation has been aware of the need for good air quality, indoor air quality, and how long we have had tools such as ASHRAE's standards for achieving better IAQ outcomes. And yet, these standards are currently not being comprehensively used or implemented, even the minimum standards that Dr. Allen was referencing earlier. Only one state, the state of Maine, has adopted ASHRAE Standard 62.1 and 62.2 into its building and energy code. 18 other states reference some portion of ASHRAE's ventilation standards, but this is done differently across the states, with some referencing ASHRAE standards from over 2 decades ago. It is mainly the prescriptive ventilation rates of standard ASHRAE 62.1 that are included and adopted in building codes and referenced in the International Mechanical Code, not its very important provisions related to system design, construction, operation, and maintenance, which Melissa alluded to earlier. With no national model IAQ standard, building ventilation and IAQ requirements vary greatly from one jurisdiction to another and fall far short of achieving the impact of full compliance with ASHRAE's code and intended standards. Standards clearly have limited impact if not adopted into code and enforced. The COVID-19 pandemic brought IAQ into greater focus. ASHRAE was one of the first organizations that recognized SARS-CoV-2 could be transmitted through the air and that ventilation, filtration, and air cleaning can reduce the risk of transmission. ASHRAE published hundreds of pages of guidance materials and conducted numerous briefings and webinars with governments and concerned communities. And yet, as the standards developer for HVACR and building systems, when the COVID pandemic struck, even we did not have a mitigation standard for airborne pathogens. With some prodding from the White House, in particular from the COVID response coordinator, Dr. Ashish Shah, ASHRAE produced Standard 241, Control of Infectious Aerosols, which I have here. ASHRAE 241 is the first consensus-based standard that establishes minimum requirements for control of infectious aerosols to reduce the risk of disease transmission in indoor environments. As a technical society that is restricted from advancing commercial interests, the standard is technology agnostic and allows for a combination of engineering controls defining the amount of equivalent clean air flow necessary to substantially reduce the risk of disease transmission during infection risk management mode. As the Government Affairs Director for ASHRAE, I am not the technical expert on Standard 241 nor any of the standards. My job is to bring ASHRAE's technical resources to policymakers and elected officials so that they can make better decisions concerning the built environment. I am encouraged by states like Maine and those that adopt and I'm hopeful that more will follow and also incorporate 241 as well. Recommendation number 13 in the Commission's National Blueprint, which focuses on pathogen mitigation, importantly recommends incorporating technologies that suppress pathogen mitigation in built environments. And I would stress the need for adopting IAQ and infectious aerosol control standards into building codes, as well as establishing a national model IAQ standard to guide jurisdictions across the country. Today's event coincides with another important achievement for advancing IAQ in this country. This morning, Congressman Paul Tonko and Brian Fitzpatrick introduced the Indoor Air Quality and Healthy Schools Act of 2024. This bipartisan legislation, which is supported by a wide range of public health, medical, and building organizations, including ASHRAE and USGBC, would strengthen the authority of U.S. EPA to support IAQ through research, standards and codes development, training and education, and technical support. Of course, we understand that it is unlikely this bill will be acted upon in 2024, but the introduction of this bipartisan bill and its strong support demonstrates the growing awareness to our nation's health of IAQ's importance to our nation's health and economy, along with the great work of this commission. ASHRAE does hope that future iterations of the bill will include a requirement that EPA develop guidance for building design, operation, and maintenance that would accelerate healthier indoor environments and would be in line with the goals of the legislation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Congressman Fitzpatrick has my old seat. He's my congressman, so I'll tell him you gave him a shout out today. So the previous panel said a couple of things that I want to address. One of them was clearly that having good indoor air quality controls is a money saver. It is economically in the advantage of the building owners and operators. But we also heard that there's some resistance. So my question is, in order to optimize the benefits that could come from this technology, is the financial incentive to do it sufficient to the task, or do we need regulatory regulations to which you referred, and I guess the bill does that, and do we need financial incentives? So there's sort of three ways you can skin this cat. One, just let the market work. Two is require it, and the three is to incentivize it with maybe some sort of tax response. So if you could each respond to that, please.
So the work that we do with the LEED rating system is a voluntary compliance standard. So when we are putting together the scorecard and trying to incentivize through recognition of meeting a voluntary standard through certification, we are aiming sort of maybe towards the middle of what you're describing, which is recognition and market-based promotion. So whether having that recognition helps to attract tenants or bring faster lease-up rates or otherwise sort of make your project more financially viable, there's a lot to be said for that voluntary compliance and voluntary recognition. And we have seen over the years that work can really then help to be a testing ground for things like code. So then we get to, what has worked there becoming part of, what becomes sort of the code and the minimums that are required for everyone. One of the things that I did also want to point out in our work with Green Schools through the Center for Green Schools is that we do see quite a lot of deferred maintenance and a lot of, capital needs that are not addressed necessarily across all of the building stock. So while voluntary compliance is critical, and that is where the core of our work, I think there is an unaddressed need, whether it's through tax incentives or otherwise, to recognize that critical maintenance and the work that can be done really at the core to protect health through maintenance of ventilation, filtration, et cetera, does need to be financed in certain ways and can be incentivized. So I think there's room for both across the work that we do and meeting different critical needs.
Thank you. Dr. Warlow.
Thank you for your question. We're very data-driven, very clinical study-driven, and our studies did include ROI as taking the hospital's metrics themselves. So relative to IVF, simply by controlling indoor air quality and guaranteeing a certain level of air quality in that space, the clinical improvements that they saw dramatically drove their economic metrics and patient volume. In the healthcare studies, because we removed the infectious airborne pathogens, both biological and chemical, above that provided by HEPA filtration, their ROI was really driven by reduced length of stay in the hospital, so that their billing cycle was improved dramatically, and there was a direct profitability per bed, per patient bed, and that continues to be realized. Honestly, a metric we were not tracking, it wasn't part of the IRB protocol, were staff call-outs. And both clinical studies in senior living, as well as in the acute care healthcare setting, demonstrated a 47% reduction in staff call-outs in the area protected by the technology. That then minimized, didn't completely go away, but minimized the reduction or the use of third-party agencies. By not using third-party agencies, that saves on economics, but also prevents personal care failures, because those healthcare workers may not know the patients, the system, the protocols, the senior residents, et cetera. So the ROI was clearly defined in that regard. With our installation in the airport, they're reporting a reduction in TSA agent callouts, which now we don't know to date yet. It's a fairly recent installation, the exact dollar ROI, but they're thrilled with that, and they'll continue to report that data to us.
Thank you. Ms. Yates.
Thank you, Congressman. In answer to your question, yes, all of the above. I think what's important.
Hey, if you could embellish, and is there a difference in all of the above depending upon the kind of building it is? Yep.
Yes, and the market, and I think from the government affairs perspective, what is doable? What can we get past? I think that's really important as a starting point. While ASHRAE would want to see a national model code, should it be voluntary? Our standards are voluntary, consensus-based. They become law when they're incorporated into building codes. The bipartisan Tonko-Fitzpatrick bill is all voluntary, and that was when they were working on it. That was a big debate. And I don't want to talk too much, but the buildings industry may be more willing to pick up these wonderful technologies in some markets versus others. We've seen huge vacancy rates across this country. Could we change that by marketing and giving some more PR, by adding sensors to show that it's safe to come back? We don't know yet. We don't know yet how the market has changed. And I think while the professor from Harvard, Dr. Joe Allen, was very positive, and I really appreciate his forward leaning, there may be some other markets in the country, as well as the buildings industry, construction industry, that may push back. ASHRAE Standard 90.1, which is an energy conservation standard, became model code, the national model code under the by statute. That code, even though it's required by states to be used, there's no carrot, and there's some carrots, but there are no sticks. That's not enforced. We see state after state after state not updating their energy conservation codes, even though you have a national model code for energy. So I would recommend, even like for this legislation, have EPA say that this isn't a national model code for IAQ, so that states have that signal from the federal government, hopefully for better and not for worse, that this is a good standard. And you could even include in statute a requirement that it become cost effective. That's how ASHRAE 90.1 is. It has to be cost effective. So I think a combination of those approaches, and also PR, the public needs to understand and recognize what's going on in their air, and they usually don't understand it until they become sick. It's after the fact. So with the sensors and the new technology that's out there, I think that will increase the public's knowledge of why IAQ is so important. But I think also a PR campaign. We just welcome events like these as well to spread awareness. Thank you.
Thank you. So no federal requirement, but federal standards, and then states have the option of making it a requirement. Localities have the option of making it a requirement.
I think that could be a very good approach.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Shilley?
But what we're really talking about is economic incentives to drive change. When we strengthened the building codes after our hurricanes, it was very clear that you couldn't get insurance unless you had stronger building codes. CMS in the healthcare area has penalized hospitals that have too high a number of infections, so they've used that kind of lever. Do the LEED certified buildings, I can't remember, I built a lot of LEED certified buildings, whether they had a requirement about ventilation systems as part of it?
So yes, we have had minimum ventilation rates included in LEED really from the beginning. There's an indoor environmental quality category. So we're recognizing both through prerequisite minimums of ventilation and then incentivizing voluntary adoption through rewarding the credits in the scorecard to go above and beyond. In our current draft version that is due out next year, we're proposing going a bit further and actually requiring minimum filtration on both outdoor and recirculated air that would be coming into the building. So pushing further through that prerequisite minimum beyond just minimum ventilation, and then continuing to reward buildings that go above and beyond.
So one way of doing it is through the accreditation process for those that want LEED certified buildings. Another way is for government regulations on healthcare facilities. But we're also talking about, general federal guidelines. A lot of this happens after catastrophic events, and that's what we're concerned about here. We're concerned about anticipating a catastrophic event by making sure that our buildings have proper ventilation systems for both anticipating. And the question is whether we have to scare people first to get some movement. And the building trades is more marginal than people understand. And so even an incremental increase in cost may cause them to hesitate. And there's still a lot of old-fashioned building going on in this country. Do you all three of you, do you see some movement towards getting some of this done?
The increase in episodic events, whether it's wildfires or other disasters that we've all seen, I think has served to, and then of course, living through the COVID-19 pandemic, has raised awareness in a way that whether it's tenants or occupants or even people that are hospital patients, there's an awareness that did not exist, years ago in the general population. And that has led to an increase in questions and people looking for these types of solutions, which in turn, of course, helps to motivate, the building industry to respond. So we are seeing, increased use of standards like LEED and increased interest and demand from tenants, et cetera, for asking these questions, looking for change, and really understanding what's happening in their building and how they can respond positively to it. So definitely seeing, more interest to help move the market forward. And that's also why, as we looked at our next version, we felt that we could move the bar in what we were asking for because the market is ready to respond. And, I think we've seen incredible advances in technology. I think the basics of what needs to be done is known. And we need to continue to remind everyone of that and encourage that so that we are ready, whether it is just a seasonal, disease outbreak or other catastrophic events.
I think the learnings from our most recent pandemic are critical. I was recently reading the manuscript published in 2003 from the first SARS-CoV, the first SARS pandemic. and just, what do we learn from that and what we apply going forward. I know for us, it's generated a lot of discussions with leaders in infection control who now consider the most successful form of infection control to be a very dynamic process in addressing airborne as well as surface pathogens. Relative to your last topic and question, perhaps revisiting CMS and the funding, perhaps adding improved infrastructure as part of accreditation of CMS, perhaps suggesting that a % of CMS funding back to the hospitals, that an upgrade of their infrastructure be required as part of that, just putting more emphasis and rewards for doing what's right. I know a lot of our retrofit installations see antiquated air handlers. They see antiquated HVAC systems, which are that's certainly not a proactive stance towards another pandemic.
Thank you, Secretary Shalala, for that excellent question. Incentives are definitely key, and I really appreciated that in your blueprint, you added a great suggestion about FEMA and rebuilding. If you're going to get some federal funds, that you could add a requirement to have IAQ standards applied. I think that's an excellent suggestion. One, historically, we saw 90.1, which is our energy standard, not getting updated, even though statute required it to states to do so. During the ARPA years, the American Reinvestment Act, funding to states was dependent on states updating their energy codes. Some of the IRA funding also makes that requirement. We saw a huge uptick in states all of a sudden because there's money on the table. They update their building standards. That was energy standards. The same could be done with IAQ standards. And I think that's an excellent way. If you're going to receive federal funds, do it in a way that makes Americans healthier and more productive and puts less burden on the public and taxpayers. Thank you.
Congressman Upton.
Well, thank you all for your testimony. I've got a number of questions that have spurred from your comments. And first, Dr. Worlow, congratulations. I really appreciate your personal story. I was not familiar with Life Air before, and I presume that because of the experience that you went through, you've transformed all your buildings, all your facilities into meeting the tests that you described. Is that right?
Are you referring to within in vitro fertilization?
No. But you've got senior care facilities as well, right? Do you not or not?
Yes. Well, we've recently, actually, all of the data that I shared is now published in peer-reviewed journals. So the long-term care data is the most recent. So we're just now starting to talk with long-term care providers.
Mm-hmm.
But
as I think about where we need to go, it reminds me a little bit about the debate 40 some years ago when we talked about the Americans with Disabilities Act. And Michigan, my state of Michigan, was one of the leaders in that it passed legislation that any new building had to subscribe to the standards to take care of folks that was as related to ADA. And the Congress came back. I was there when President Bush signed it into law. And actually, one of the first bills I worked on was with my good friend Kwesi Mfume, and we passed a tax credit for small businesses that had to make structural changes to comply with the ADA, knowing that small businesses didn't want to. They were just financially unable to comply with the rules, and so that tax credit was a huge help, of which Rostenkowski included it in the big tax bill back in, I guess it was back in the 80s. And I appreciate your using Brian Fitzpatrick and Paul Tomko, two really good friends, two real leaders in the Congress in terms of bipartisanship. And I guess as I think about this issue, Maine has been a leader on it. And I just wonder if you can use Maine perhaps as we use Michigan with ADA to really set a standard in terms of beginning to build that framework to get the bipartisan support needed to make some real changes.
May I address that? Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your leadership in Michigan. As I mentioned earlier, I worked for Carl Levin, so I love other Michiganders, and thank you for all of your great work over the years. Using Michigan or Maine in this case as an example is a great idea. ASHRAE's board of directors just this June, a month ago, approved funding to help put together a multi-pronged strategy for better advocating for IAQ standards. And so we're looking at the state level, we're looking at the federal level, Congress as well as the executive branch, and that's an excellent way of doing it. With respect to the tax credit, Congressman Beyer, who's on Ways and Means, introduced the Airborne Act. This was introduced about 4 years ago, right during the COVID pandemic. He and his staff consulted with ASHRAE subject matter experts, and it's a tax credit specifically for commercial properties because the retail, especially small retail establishments, they can't pay for these improvements, even if we think they're cost effective. They don't benefit from the cost savings at an emergency room or something like that. So we're not capturing the costs properly when we're looking at the economics. Congressman Beyer last week reintroduced the legislation with some additional savings measures on energy use. He got some pushback, unfortunately, but not completely surprisingly, from folks that want to address the climate crisis. IAQ and energy conservation and fighting the climate crisis can be done all at the same time. And so those additional provisions were included last week, and this kind of tax credit bill could also be really significant for small businesses. Thank you.
And Ms. Baker, you talked about the need and use of monitors and sensors to be able to, so individuals working, are those readily available? I mean, could someone come in? Does anyone here in this room have a monitor with them? I don't know how good Hudson is, but are they fairly commonplace? Do we have an answer? Is there no?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if we were in a room where, on this topic, if a few people do not have sensors in their pocket.
Can you look and just see what it is? Just.
And I assume.
And while you're looking, yeah, we just lost our lease. yeah, no.
Are you sure?
I'm kidding.
They lose
Yeah,
our audience.
yeah, they lose our audience. So that's pretty good then. That's a pretty good score, right? Okay, everybody can stay. The elevator pass will work again, so you can get down. All right, well, thank you, sir. Last question, and I know GSA is on the next panel. So, are you working with as you think about federal buildings and feds trying to lead the way? How have they been receptive to this issue?
GSA is ASHRAE's friend, and I used to work there too, so they're great. Brian Gilligan, who's speaking on the next panel, may be talking about this pilot program that they're launching that will pilot ASHRAE Standard 241. There are some questions about how easy it is to implement, et cetera. And so we're delighted to be working with GSA. GSA also, they have what's called the P100, which is their building standards for federal facilities. And they have, reference a lot of ASHRAE standards. They actually go further as well. We also work with FEMP out of DOE, who is working on a lot of training programs and performance standards for their federal facilities. So the federal facilities are taking a real leadership role. But it can be challenging. I mean, when I was at GSA, we had problems with mold in some of the buildings, and we had congressmen yelling at us. And but that was important to address those challenges. So thank you.
And
go ahead.
if I may, we have been supporting the GSAs are participating in their Health and Buildings Roundtable, and certainly also consider GSA a strong partner over the years. The way that we build our rating system is through member volunteers, and we've had many members of the federal workforce participate with us to help build those standards, as well as using the GSA buildings, as testing grounds for all this work, and they pursue LEED certification as well on their buildings. So it's been a great exchange of information. I think GSA has really represented, and those case studies can really be used to show some of what you're asking. Is it working? What does it cost? How can we show that this is actually practical in implementation?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I had one comment on the sensor. From our data across, whether it be IVF, healthcare, or long-term care, or in commercial office buildings, we've learned that most sensors are parts per million. The toxic impacts occur at parts per billion. So, I mean, you can get a live sensor that's parts per billion, but most that are commercially available are parts per million. So you want to be cognizant of the numbers that are being reported, just because parts per billion is toxic.
Dr. Hamburg.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for your presentations and discussion and your work. I have two slightly awkward questions, one for Ms. Yates and one for Dr. Warlow. I'm going to spare Ms. Baker an awkward question, but I have to confess I'm kind of confused about how to be thinking about what we need going forward, and what an organization like the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense can do to help advance actions that matter. And for you, Ms. Yates, I am a little bit confused as a former regulator. Perhaps I have a different perspective than many, but I'm not sure whether you would really like to see ASHRAE's standards and guidance be adopted as enforceable federal regulation, or whether you think that that's unrealistic in terms of the context in which federal regulation might unfold, or whether you think that, sort of letting things happen and working with industry and bringing people along and educating the public and perhaps having a few crises that drive action is making meaningful progress and is adequate.
Excellent question. Thank you, Dr. Hamburg. Let me just step back a bit on what ASHRAE standards are, because it's confusing. When you think about the NAAQS, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, those are like parts per million, parts per billion. They're by their concentration levels by pollutant. An ASHRAE standard is a design standard that's a voluntary consensus-based standard. So that's what gets confusing. It's further confused because energy conservation standards, some of them per another statute, require use of certain components of ASHRAE standard 90.1. ASHRAE does want its standards to be incorporated into code and enforced, because these volunteers spend thousands and thousands and thousands of hours. And if they're not incorporated into code, there's not a motivation necessarily to use them. Engineers know about them, but if they're not referenced in the design documents, then they don't have to. Then they don't have to apply, even though they're updated. Most of our standards are updated continuously. It's called continuous maintenance, and then every 3 years a new version is published. The reason we don't, forgetting the second part of your question, but the reason that it's not, the reason this will be received by industry is that ASHRAE standards are consensus-based. So any and all people can participate on in the standards process. It's this a weird world that for a lot of people, including myself, I didn't really know how it all worked. we put out a standard for public review. Anybody can comment. Then we have to respond to their comments. It's almost like we're government. It's almost like the APA.
In comment rulemaking.
Yeah. So the voting components, they all have to be balanced so we can have some consumers, some manufacturers, some engineers. It has to be a balanced committee. So the good part about this is that you can say this is a consensus document. There was a lot of debate, and this is another reason they take so darn long to create, because you have people meeting and talking and talking. Did I answer your question? So, and one, I guess I should say, building codes are done at the state and local level. So what the federal government's role would be to say, this is important. This is important for our nation's health. This is important for the well-being of children. This is important for the well-being of business, because you'll have more productivity. You'll have better well-being. You can think more clearly. So the federal government would say, this is a model national code that we recommend that states and local jurisdictions, whoever is the authority having jurisdiction, should adopt into their building codes. The second part of how to enforce it and the right operations and maintenance and commissioning, which Dr. Allen referenced, is also really important, but that's a little bit harder to figure out how to incorporate. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, that sort of perilous intersection that you were just describing is sort of what I'm sort of struggling with. How can we, do a better job to make sure that things that we know can make a difference actually get implemented and sustained over time?
Thank you. And I would just say, get the baseline. I know that ASHRAE's, the 62.1 and 62.2, they're kind of the minimum standards. But we don't even have that in a lot of schools and other places. So just to encourage that, I think would be very helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And just quickly, my awkward question for you, Dr. I mean, what you describe sounds like, a very, very well-designed and tested approach to improving air quality in a number of settings where it can truly make a difference. I guess, though, as you look forward, do you think that the kinds of technologies that you have developed and can bring to bear in the near term are sufficient for how we think about building over the longer term? Or what's the trade-off between the kind of mobile systems that you have, as I understand it, or that can be added into an existing structure versus, as we think about future buildings, is it better? This is why it's an awkward question, because I'm asking, about the future of your company as well as the future of the health of the public. But is it better to actually build the capacities that your systems now can bring to an existing building into the buildings of the future? Do you understand my question?
I think so. Our installed base is probably 50-50 new build versus existing buildings. And so, whether it's a difficult retrofit or an easier new build design, and our system actually, it's not mobile, it's part of the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So it replaces so many feet of ductwork downstream of the air handler before the space that you want to protect.
So you're like an existing capacity that can just be purchased and built into
whether it
to
be
new building
existing
HVAC
or
systems.
new.
Okay,
Yes.
that answers my question. Thank you.
Rachel Levinson.
Yes, thank you. So this panel and the first panel have just been amazing to me in terms of how far along you are in thinking about what needs to be done, and especially what this commission can recommend to the federal government, but would have broader impacts. So even though I think we've gotten a lot of really good questions that I did. Okay. I'm short, so I'll put it over here. Thank you for that. what else might be done? And I'm thinking about possible pressure points that may or may not have been addressed so far, because it really seems as if you're very well connected and very well positioned with the industry and with the researchers as well to figure out what needs to be put in both with new construction and retrofitting, because that's obviously critical. So a couple of places that I'm thinking about that you may or may not have thought about or addressed. CDC block grants to states. This is disease prevention that you're talking about. And CDC just hands big chunks of money to the states, and the states largely do what they want. If that can come with more strings, and I don't know whether this is something that's possible, but it's something the commission could certainly look into. And if you have any thoughts about that, that would be great. Agencies are putting out requests for information, RFIs, like crazy. And that is partly for them to figure out what they want to put in their upcoming proposals, but it's also generating public knowledge and the public support that can reflect back on Congress. So where there is the appropriations process that gets affected, that can be a good information source. The same way talking about the public, patient advocacy groups. Right now, we're looking at the fastest growing patient group, I think, long COVID. What are the other diseases, whether it's influenza, certainly a good one, because you talked about the patient population there. That's important. The OMB, Office of OIRA, Regulatory Information, they look at what the agencies are proposing for regulations, and in some cases, but not all, look at the cost benefit of a new regulation. So information that you can develop that talks about the cost benefit of the measures that you're thinking about could be useful. The other was mentioned briefly, I think, that Secretary Shalala mentioned insurance. Insurance companies and their liability are a huge driver, especially in terms of state and local implementation of various measures, because they're the ones that are paying the costs if people don't, or organizations, companies don't comply. So making that a requirement for your insurance to make sure that you are complying with these standards that you have already developed with industry input, but not necessarily the insurance industry. Health insurance as well, that fits with them. So your suggestions or ideas that we might as a commission follow up to maybe put the appropriate language into our recommendations would be very helpful. And any suggestions you have right now would be very helpful as well.
Any suggestions right now? All right. Hearing none, thank you each for being with us today and for your contributions and the work you're doing. And come back again sometime. Thanks.
And you might hear from us.
Thank you, everyone. Panel 3 is really the federal perspective. And let me introduce W. Stuart Doles from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Catherine Ratliff from the Environmental Protection Agency, and Brian Gilligan from the General Services Administration. And Stuart, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to address the commission here. Your agenda might say Dr. Lisa Ng. I'm not Lisa. I'm not a doctor either. I've been accused of being one in the past, but anyway, my name is Stuart Doles. I'm a mechanical engineer and computer scientist in the Indoor Air Quality and Ventilation Group at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, as we call it, which is just up the road from here. Well, I do have years and years of experience. It's not till more recently I currently lead a project that mainly focuses on the development and application of software tools.
Just a closer.
Thank you. For analyzing indoor air quality. Buildings are responsible for approximately 40% of total energy uses in the U.S. Therefore, much work is being done to reduce building energy use. While this is important from both an environmental and economic standpoint, it is important to note that the primary function of buildings relate to those who occupy them, us. We're in them now. We spend 90% of our lives indoors, if you've been hearing all day today, inhaling more air by mass than we ingest in water. Poor IAQ can have a profound effect on building occupants and lead to economic impacts associated with the loss of productivity, health-related burdens, and in the extreme deaths. Our group at NIST has been leading the government in IAQ research for over 4 decades. The group was originally formed during the energy crisis in the 1970s to address the role that ventilation plays in building energy consumption and IAQ. When the anthrax letters were sent to the Hart Senate Office Building in 2001, some of you may have even been around then, the architect of the Capitol called NIST to help them understand how the spores move through the building and how best to utilize the building ventilation system to protect against future attacks. During the COVID pandemic, we worked with the Centers for Disease Control to address how to reduce the spread of SARS-CoV-2 within buildings using ventilation and filtration through the rapid development of online analysis tools. Over the years, NIST has partnered with many other federal agencies, national labs, and universities to address IAQ and ventilation issues. We addressed energy-related issues associated with building ventilation with the Department of Energy, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the General Services Administration. We addressed general IAQ-related issues with the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And we addressed more acute health and extreme event-related issues with the EPA, Consumer Product Safety Commission, and multiple defense-related agencies. These connections have helped agencies solve real-world problems, for example, using large-scale building models to determine operational settings of ventilation systems to maintain IAQ in both residential and commercial buildings, evaluating the dangers of improper use of portable generators, and reducing the risk to building occupants in the event of chemical biological attacks. Among other IAQ-related research performed within the IAQ and ventilation group, we develop and maintain a suite of publicly available tools that can simulate airflow and pollutant movement within whole buildings. Pollutants could be generated indoors from building materials or occupant-related activities, and generated outdoors from sources like automobile exhaust or from extreme events associated with wildfires or chemical biological attacks. Our flagship program, CONTAM, has been under continuous development since the mid-1980s. CONTAM is used for analyzing whole building, multi-zone airflow, and contaminant transport. It has been used in a variety of applications, including those I previously mentioned, and even designing and analyzing smoke management systems. The most recent developments in CONTAM are enabling it to be incorporated into other analysis frameworks. For example, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency is incorporating CONTAM into a tool for evaluating potential exposure of building occupants to either indoor or outdoor releases on an urban scale. These recent developments also allow for CONTAM to be used in conjunction with building energy analysis tools. In essence, we're reaching across the aisle to energy modelers, between energy and IAQ modelers, enabling them to address the interdependence between energy and IAQ in a cohesive modeling framework. So we can address indoor air quality and the energy trade-offs, through a single simulation framework. Tools like CONTAM will be necessary when developing strategies to design against or respond to IAQ-related threats. Simulations can be used to evaluate what-if scenarios. For example, where should outdoor air inlets be installed to minimize contaminant intake during an event? How can buildings be configured and operated to shelter in place? What is the response of the ventilation system in the case of a biological threat, chemical threat, or wildfire? How do we best safely return occupants to the building once the threat is mitigated? While these tools can be used to simulate occupant exposure to indoor contaminant levels, metrics and standards are required against which the outputs of these tools can be compared. The development of such metrics for non-industrial environments is paramount to establishing acceptable IAQ. Energy modelers can demonstrate success by tying energy usage to energy cost. IAQ modelers need a cohesive set of metrics and standards to demonstrate the benefits of IAQ. In many cases, the best we can do is perform comparative analyses to reduce levels of contaminants of concerns within a building. In closing, improving IAQ in general would have a positive impact on reducing the spread of pathogens and other pollutants, creating resilient indoor environments, and ensuring that buildings in which we live and work do not have adverse effects on our lives. Thank you.
Dr. Ratliff.
Thank you to the
Now, can you hear me now? All right. Thank you to the Commission for your important work and for hosting this meeting and for the opportunity to be here today. I am a physical scientist within the EPA's Office of Research and Development, and I'd like to start off by saying that my remarks should not be considered official views of the agency or agency policy. I sit within EPA's ORD, Office of Research and Development, and I lead research under EPA's Homeland Security Research Program. Within this program, we support EPA's responsibilities by developing tools and methods needing to respond to and recover from chemical, biological, and radiological disasters. Our program was founded following the challenges that were highlighted following the remediation efforts during the 2001 Amerithrax attacks. And since then, we've continued to conduct applied research to improve public health protections, specifically enhancing preparedness to respond to ever-emerging and evolving threats. It is because of this expertise in decontamination and disinfection that we quickly redirected some of our research at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic to address many of the questions in support of limiting the spread of COVID-19 through reducing environmental exposures to SARS-CoV-2. As a part of this, we provided nonstop technical support to stakeholders, including other federal, state, and local agencies. Initially, our focus was on reducing exposure to SARS-CoV-2 on surfaces. But as we all began to understand the role that air plays in the spread of COVID-19, we began to get more and more questions about technologies that could be potentially used to reduce the concentrations of infectious SARS-CoV-2 in the air. These inquiries were coming from many different partners and research stakeholders, and everybody wanted to know the best way to protect against spreading the disease in their respective settings, whether it be in a classroom, in a subway car, a bus, or a place of worship. Everybody wanted to figure out how to repopulate indoor spaces safely. And so we received lots of requests relating to new and emerging technologies, including novel types of UV ultraviolet devices, ionizers, chemical air treatments, all kinds of things. And many of these technologies are exciting in that they promote additional protections over traditional filtration alone, and they could potentially do so in a more energy efficient manner. We were asked again and again if the technologies could live up to their claims, which technologies might be the most useful, and where they might be most effective. And as we looked at the available testing data provided often by companies, we realized that it was very challenging to assess how these technologies would actually work in real-world settings. Because there is no standard test method for evaluating their effectiveness, the experiments were conducted using many different laboratory methods, making it impossible to compare across studies and ultimately compare technologies and predict how well they might perform in the diversity of real-world applications. Additionally, testing was often conducted under conditions that were ideal for product or technology performance, but not so representative of the real world. For example, experiments were almost always conducted on a much smaller spatial scale. So, for example, in a glove box, compared to how these technologies would be applied and operated in the real world. And when tested this way, the lab data can effectively overstate how well they perform against pathogens. This leads to really confusing science and oftentimes misleading advertising. Given these challenges, it was extremely difficult to provide stakeholders with informed guidance on how well these technologies would actually work to improve indoor air quality and reduce the risk of disease transmission. It is because of these critical knowledge gaps that we again stood up new research to evaluate these air cleaning and treatment technologies. We adapted specialized laboratory facilities in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, and created a new large bioaerosol test chamber where we can conduct experiments at a scale more representative of real-world conditions. We engaged with experts across government, industry, and academia to design a test method that was broadly representative of a range of indoor settings. And our aim was, again, to maximize the translatability of our results. To date, we've tested many different types of these products and devices. Many of them are commercially available. Some are prototypes in development. And we've even tested a DIY air cleaner that was built by middle schoolers. And in addition to publishing scientific papers, we got the word out about our findings in a variety of ways. We always tailored the information to different decision makers and end users, and we posted the results online in near real time, gave lots of webinars and presentations, and met with public health officials. So we've taken what we've learned and continue to learn to help develop new standardized test methods. We've heard a lot about standards today that support both EPA's regulatory mission and the marketplace through organizations like ASHRAE and ANSI. Transparent voluntary consensus standards for both effectiveness and safety are critically needed to make informed decisions about the optimal use of these technologies, as well as to drive innovation that improves public health protections against disease transmission. These standards are also integral for understanding how to use air cleaning technologies to achieve new indoor air quality standards such as ASHRAE 241, as well as the new ventilation guidance that CDC released last year. This guidance is the first time that a federal agency has made any clean air benchmark for reducing the risk of disease transmission indoors. So as our new research area became increasingly recognized both in the U.S. and internationally, we've gotten exciting new opportunities to continue to push this field forward. For example, we're supporting a new DoD-led effort focused on protection of military barracks and administrative buildings from airborne biological contaminants. The Enhanced Bioprotection for Facilities program is funded by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency and led by the Army Corps of Engineers Engineer Research and Development Center. The program is focused on mitigating threats associated with infection risk from outdoor attacks as well as indoor threats, including contagion scenarios, and by using the findings of building scale models to update engineering guidance. Our EPA team is performing physical experiments in our RTP lab to validate the modeling results and improve design guideline updates. We are also collaborating with DOE's a few DOE national labs on this interdisciplinary project where we are weighing many different considerations, including energy efficiency. We also continue to support EPA's regulatory office, the Office of Pesticide Programs, for these technologies by developing test methods for antimicrobial air cleaning devices that make public health claims. So at this time, post-pandemic, there is a great opportunity to take advantage of the sustained public attention, scientific and technological developments, and industry activity to improve indoor air quality. By balancing different economic, public health, security, and economic goals, we must maintain a primary focus on overall health, making sure that no single problem solutions do not end up causing different undesirable effects, which would then force costly policy and action reversals. This has happened in the past, such as with the energy-focused building tightening, which led to sick building syndrome, as addressed earlier today, and the withdrawal from the market of substances that turned out to be toxic. A holistic understanding of the effectiveness and safety of indoor air quality products is critically needed to be able to enable a functioning market, allow for informed consumer choices, and protect public health, not only for the average population, but also for its most vulnerable segments. EPA and other federal agencies will continue to work on a wide range of activities, from research to technical assistance, to financial assistance in low-income and disadvantaged communities, to guidelines development for the nation's built environment, to implementing better IAQ practices in our own buildings. Together, we can harness these exciting scientific and technological advances for improved indoor air quality that enhances our defenses against all biological threats all the time. Thank you.
Thank you. You talk very fast.
Yes.
But you got great material. Mr. Gipp.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for the opportunity to address the Commission on GSA's efforts to improve indoor air quality. Well, I want to thank the Commission for the opportunity for GSA to be able to express some of the work that we're doing to improve air quality, as well as how it relates to the National Blueprint for Biodefense. My name is Brian Gilligan. I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Federal High Performance Green Buildings at GSA. Our office advocates for innovation and design and operations of buildings in ways that reduce cost, reduce the impact on the environment, and hopefully improve human health and performance. As the federal government's landlord, GSA manages some 360 million square feet of real estate, more than 1,600 federally owned buildings, and 6,000 leases all across the United States. It's our mission to provide safe and effective workspaces for all our tenants. And while there's no single law governing IAQ across the nation, GSA does follow laws and regulations that manage safety and environmental management in federal facilities. These often reference consensus-based standards like ASHRAE, as has been mentioned many times, and also provide a foundation for reducing the transmission of disease in the built environment, as is required by the National Blueprint. Our office advocates for GSA to go beyond those standards where it's practical to do so. Good air quality depends on adequately funded facilities maintenance and repair. Necessary repairs for GSA have been unfunded in the past. Since 2011, more than $13 billion in rental payments have been that are supposed to go to the Federal Buildings Fund were diverted to purposes not related to federal buildings. That has led to a deferred maintenance backlog of some $4.6 billion. When maintenance is impacted, so too is our foundation for reducing pathogen transmission. GSA also has critical goals for energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction. They don't need necessarily to be in tension, but energy must be considered as we're choosing how to improve indoor air quality. That's a mandate that we have. The guiding principles for sustainable federal buildings and various building system or building certification systems like LEED and WELL do provide strategies for enhancing both air quality and energy efficiency. Emerging technologies will also be essential to successfully balancing these goals. Our office, again, advocates for emerging strategies and technologies where they're practical. Under the Clean Air Buildings Challenge led by the EPA, GSA and other federal agencies committed to providing cleaner indoor air across the nation. GSA made 3 commitments in that challenge. The first was to extend a national ventilation verification program to more buildings in our portfolio. The second was for us to consider emerging standards for ventilation post-COVID, like those proposed by ASHRAE, CDC, and EPA. And then the third was to convene experts to try to prioritize our research for our real-world research for ventilation programs in the future. First, I'd like to talk about our ventilation verification program. It uses GSA's CARES Act funding to ensure compliance with minimum ventilation standards across more than half of our portfolio of federally owned buildings. The process involves testing and balancing mechanical systems to make sure that we're bringing in sufficient outdoor air, as well as basic equipment repairs to make sure that buildings are operated as they were designed to. This process, while critical, is an acknowledgement also, I think, of the concerns I mentioned with inadequate funding of maintenance. Second, I'll address the evaluation of emerging ventilation requirements. As Alice Yates mentioned, in 2023, our office convened experts from across industry, government, and academia to try to understand which of the post-COVID requirements for ventilation, ASHRAE, CDC, and EPA, we should really focus on. The experts urged GSA to study ASHRAE Standard 241 for control of infectious aerosols. That standard is flexible, suggests many options to address risk, including the use of air cleaning technologies that are also stressed in the blueprint. The ventilation verification work at the Domenici Federal Courthouse in Albuquerque, New Mexico will evaluate this standard, both to demonstrate how it might be applied broadly across existing buildings in our portfolio. Our portfolio is mostly existing buildings at this point, and to show how we can balance risk reduction and energy use. Third, in 2023, our office convened experts with diverse backgrounds from building operations, mechanical design, public health, medicine, facilities management, and academic research to identify our top 10 priorities for real-world research. Our report emphasizes how we should study ways to improve building operations and maintenance by consistently gathering data in 3 categories: real-time monitoring of IAQ in occupied spaces, human health and well-being aggregated at our facility level, and then tracking that against condition assessments and maintenance investments that are being made in those facilities. As has been said, if you can't achieve what you don't measure, and we need better measurements in these areas. In addition to enhancing data tracking, GSA is also testing equipment, or will be a testing equipment, that can provide equivalent clean air in buildings, both through our Green Proving Ground program and through projects that are being invested in through the Inflation Reduction Act. These will include evaluation of germicidal ultraviolet irradiation and in-room filtration technologies. We are also considering opportunities to partner with the ARPA-H Breathe program, where we might be able to test the emerging generation of biosensors in our buildings. In closing, GSA is using available funding to improve IAQ performance in our existing facilities. We're testing emerging standards to try to understand if we can improve facility resilience in the face of future biothreats. And we're evaluating emerging technologies to provide more cleaner air in our facilities. Our office will continue to advocate for these initiatives where they're practical, and I'm happy to answer your questions on GSA's efforts to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all 3 of you. Representative Greenwood?
Thank you. I just have some questions for Dr. Ratliff on your testing program that you described. So, first question is it voluntary on the maker of the technology to allow its technology to be tested, or do you just go out and acquire it and test it whether they like it or not?
We've done a little bit of both. We've partnered a lot with a number of industry folks through some agreements to be able to do that cooperative testing. We actually have some cooperative agreements with some industry partners that are currently in place to continue to try to work on that research together and move the technology forward. We've had some simpler agreements where we simply just work with the company to take their device, test it, provide the results back to them and to the general public. And then we also have gone about just buying things commercially available off the shelf because there could obviously be some concerns about if the devices that we're getting are representative of what's commercially available. So we've done a little bit of everything.
And so you're more of a Consumer Reports or a Yelp than you are a regulator. I mean, you don't pass or fail, right? You just
That's correct.
provide data, right?
Correct. Within the Office of Research and Development, that is our mission, is to try to provide those data that are relevant to the regulators, relevant to consumers, and get that information out there from a unbiased party with a lot of very important quality assurance protocols that go into all of our work so that we can ensure that these data are available for whoever needs to use them.
And so it's all public.
Correct.
Right. So then if I get a bad grade on my equipment, what happens? I mean, do you get pushback and do people complain that you're going to ruin my company because you don't know what you're doing, you're giving bad information out to the public? Does that happen?
I've been in circumstances where there have been similar types of exchanges. I mean, generally speaking, I think we all are trying to move this industry forward. And so there's a lot of common ground where we can get together and try to do that. But I will say that oftentimes the way that we test devices and under conditions that are more realistic and representative of the real world, the performance grade that we get from our testing is often very different from the testing that they have performed and have included in their advertising materials. And so, yes, I certainly have gotten pushback from industry partners.
And then do they have the opportunity to say, if they're reasonable, to say, thanks for the information, maybe we need to make this improvement or that improvement and do it and come back and be retested? Is that part of the program?
Yeah, I would welcome the opportunity to do that. Oftentimes, the trajectory with each of these different relationships looks a little bit different, but try to maintain those relationships as best we can. And again, try to move the whole industry forward as a result of
And do you test technology is made outside of the U.S. and manufactured elsewhere?
We have inside and outside the U.S. We've tested, in addition to commercially available things, there's been a lot of discussion about transit too. So a lot of the largest transit authorities within this country were interested in all kinds of different mitigation technologies and strategies. So we worked with them to understand these like multifaceted systems where they combine filtration and ionization and UV devices and different components obtained from different companies to try to figure out which combinations would be the most protective. And so we even have done things like that where we're partnering with a transit agency to try to test things that they're interested in.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Representative Upton.
Well, I know one of our colleagues on the board, Tom Daschle, wishes he was here because his office was directly hit in the Hart Building way back when, and we've talked about it in a couple different hearings that we've had before. So thanks for your work. It was a critical time as we certainly saw. Mr. Golden, 360 million square feet. Wow. And you can't achieve what one can't measure, was part of your statement. So do you have a group of inspectors that sometimes go out to all 50 states? You've got buildings, everywhere under the sun. Do you wait for complaints? Do you just suspect things that are bad? What's the system? Are there provisions in the leases that, with minimum standards? How does that all work? Because, and I say this as your picture looks like it was almost in high school. You've aged quite a bit you've got hair like mine now, and you have glasses. I had LASIK, so I got one step ahead of you. But tell us how your job really goes.
That's a wonderful anecdote. I just recently brought my daughter to New York City for her 16th birthday, and I was surprised by how many people gave up their seats on the subway.
Oh, yeah.
So another reinforcement there.
Yeah.
Well, so GSA has or follows strict standards for safety and environmental management, in particular around industrial hygiene. So we have inspectors at the regional level and at the building level that do periodic inspections to make sure that we're adhering to life safety requirements. We also have a very robust system of taking occupant complaints and responding to those. I think when we talk about you can't achieve what you don't measure, where the opportunity is, I think really is expanding on our smart buildings programs efforts, where we have been able to tie faults with building systems. So the system alerts us when something is not within spec or is failing, and we're able to quickly react and repair those problems. A recent study by Carnegie Mellon University found that program saves something on the order of $7 million a year in energy costs We're not able to make the same sort of assessment of its benefits to indoor air quality because we don't have as many monitors in place in the spaces, and that's what we'd like to correct.
And do you have inspector? Is there like an inspector crew? I know you've got regional offices. You know, as a former member of Congress, you know, we worked through GSA for my district offices, but do you have regional inspectors that, you know, periodically go out? I mean, what's the routine?
Right. So there are regional offices, and then within the regions, some of which span quite a large geographical area, there are service centers that are more local to individual buildings. And each of those service centers has the ability to send teams out to do inspections.
And do you feel you've got adequate funding to be able to purchase the monitors and everything else and to make sure that the federal workers are safe?
Certainly, we have resources that are adequate to maintain our industrial hygiene program to go out and measure for human health and safety situations or complaints. What I think is more problematic is being able to deploy significant numbers of air quality monitors across such a large portfolio to get automated sorts of information back. That's really, I think, the key. Our GSA Link program knits the building automation systems for over 160 buildings. We're able to see in real time whatever data is put into that system. Largely, it's building system operations and energy. It could also be air quality from these different spaces.
And I imagine you've got some cross reference or connections with EPA then as well, right? As you look at technology, right?
Yes, there are a number of partnerships between GSA and EPA in the area of air quality among them.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Hamburg.
Well, thank you very much. And I'll begin by apologizing because as soon as I ask my question and hopefully get an answer, I have to leave to catch an airplane. But really an interesting set of presentations. And Representative Upton's last question really, or comment, sort of led into the question I wanted to ask, which was how much do you coordinate amongst agencies and departments? As you were talking, I could see lots of opportunity for synergy with NIST and its standard setting and its modeling capacity, EPA with the work that you have done, both testing standards and helping to put forth standards, and of course the work that you're doing sort of in the real world with trying to implement. But you also mentioned in your comments that, you know, you are an interesting living laboratory for studying and comparing certain kinds of approaches, both in terms of implementing standards, but also looking at alternative strategies, perhaps to achieve desired outcomes. So I was just sort of wondering, whether the three of you have ever met before. Is there any kind of organized mechanism? Since we now have really identified this, I think, within government and across other sectors as a priority issue in terms of air quality, is there any formalized mechanism, and should there be, for more coordination and communication?
I'm happy to start with that. There's been a lot of cross-agency coordination and collaboration, particularly over the last few years with the pandemic related to this. A concrete sort of small example is colleagues from Mr. Dole's group and I have coordinated closely on testing these air cleaning technologies. So our lab has been focused on evaluating how effective they are against infectious aerosols, and we would test the same devices as NIST would test to assess how they chemically impact the space. So we need to understand both how these technologies would be effective against the pathogen, but also if they have any sort of adverse air quality impacts as a result of that. So we have worked together to test the exact same device that go between RTP and Gaithersburg to make sure that we're getting that picture, a holistic picture about the costs and benefits of those technologies. And I think, my colleagues and I have interacted in various capacities, but I would say one way that we have interacted too is through the OSTP work groups that have formed throughout the pandemic as well and continue to exist today. So I'm grateful to get to know folks through all of those.
And probably spend more time than you'd like on interagency meetings, but that's another issue.
Very valuable.
While we haven't met yet, but I assume you're talking about my colleague Dustin Popendick. So we have similar facilities. We might not be sharing funding directly on that project, but perhaps a meeting to an ASTM, like a volunteer test organization. So we interact that way as well. I was surprised to hear you are working on a DARPA project or DITRA project as well, wondering if she is using our software. And that's kind of a problem sometimes, is having agencies operating in isolation from each other, not really coordinating when they should. Sometimes that's good. You have independent development. Sometimes it's not great because you're not coordinating and leveraging, the capabilities. But we aren't there to force people to use our software. Our software is freely available. We try to make it available for folks who do need it. And so we don't set standards. We just develop the technology and help exchange technology among different agencies. So it can be a battle sometimes, fighting for the dollars that are out there. We're not wholly funded, but we do work with other agencies, and it really is a good interaction typically that we have. So thank you.
Yes, I would say cross collaboration across agencies is really important, and both NIST and EPA have been very helpful to GSA in developing our handbook for indoor air quality management, among other resources, references that we use. Our office is working now with the National Academies of Science to try to reinvigorate something that was run by the National Institutes of Health, a Health and Buildings Roundtable, a number of years ago. And we envision it as being a place where landholding agencies can work together to execute what we call real-world research projects and share the information between them. So we are actively recruiting other agencies, CDC, EPA, the Veterans Health Administration, and others currently to try to get that launched, because I think there's a huge, huge opportunity for that kind of sharing of real-world information.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Peggy.
All right. Good luck to all of you. Thanks again.
Has the Chevron ruling of the Supreme Court affected your work in any way?
I could start. I can't speak on behalf of the regulatory side of my agency, so I'm interested to see how things will unfold for them. But from a research standpoint, it hasn't yet.
Okay. Anyone?
Our work is not regulatory either. We manage buildings, and at this point, it has had no effect.
Okay. So I have a fun question. If there was a pathogen outbreak in your buildings, do you work in a safe building? What's your ventilation system like in your building?
That's an excellent question. I wish I knew. It's hard to answer that question because there's so many possible sources and operating modes of a system, and so I won't say it's safe or not safe, but I don't know if modes have been addressed to protect against this. We do have shelter in place. We do have shelter in place policy or methods that we're supposed to follow, but I don't think they're addressed.
I think shelter in place would help you if there's a pathogen.
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends where the source is and what your system is doing. So anyway, I don't want to say yes or no, but I'm guessing probably not.
Dr. Ratliff?
I'm fortunate to work in a relatively new federally owned facility down in Research Triangle Park. It's a really nice building, and my office is actually adjacent to a lab, so I have air that's constantly flowing through my office, and I regrettably didn't have it today. I normally do carry around a CO2 monitor, which the gentleman who talked about his monitoring data earlier, that PM data is complementary to the CO2 data that we would get. And so in my office, it's typically almost down at the levels of outdoor air CO2 concentrations, but I do sometimes take it into conference rooms and notice that CO2 ppm starts to creep up above 1,000 sometimes. So that is indicative of the fact that the way that we're populating these spaces and the way that the HVAC system is cycling can have a really big impact. And so I think it's unfortunate that it can be really challenging to know when you walk into a space, is the indoor air quality good or not, even if you are trying to be equipped with some of those sensors. So there's a lot of improvements and exciting work that can be done to help create those indoor spaces that are more healthy more consistently.
Mr. Gilligan?
Yeah, so I work from home, so I believe that my space is
So
safe.
what's your system like at home?
We do a lot of filtration in our house, in-room filtration in all the rooms. I think it's very important. 1800F is the headquarters building for GSA, and that's where I typically worked before I became a remote employee. And I would say the building, the portions of the building that we occupy that have been renovated since 2014 meet the basic requirements of ASHRAE 62.1 and exceed them in certain ways. I think Alice Yates had mentioned that our facility standards guide, the P100, largely follows a lot of aspects of ASHRAE, but exceeds it in a couple of ways, one of which is requiring additional levels of filtration on our central air handling units. So we provide MERV 13 level filtration in many of our buildings. And we went through the ventilation verification process. We found that about 65% of our filters had been replaced with these MERV 13 or better. And that goes a long way towards meeting the requirements of ASHRAE 241, the standard for infectious aerosols. It's not everything, but it goes a long way towards that. And there's certainly a lot of work to be done that we hope will start to identify in piloting ASHRAE 241 and understanding how to apply it.
What do you do in your home?
In my home, well, I have a MERV 13 filter on my AC unit, and then in each of our bedrooms we have in-room HEPA filtration.
Interesting. Tebby?
Yeah, I have a question for Gilligan. I'm very in this 360 million square feet of space that you are.
You need to put your microphone closer, Nebby.
So my question for Mr. Gilligan about the protection of the space of the 360 million square feet that is under your purview. What kind of coordination do you have with security officials within GSA to make sure that nobody is doing any nefarious plots to infiltrate the air of federal buildings?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to demur on that question. It's not my area of expertise. I know GSA has security policy that's designed to control access to buildings, and we have different security levels depending on the type of mission that's in those facilities. But that's really not my area of expertise. I'm happy to take that question and find an answer for you within GSA.
Okay, thank you. I've also got one for Mr. Gilligan. I have to say, like my friend Congressman Upton, I was looking at your bio, and I just want to put on the record that we like you just the way you are, as Billy Joel would say. You have...
My wife is really going to enjoy hearing about this.
In your bio, you speak about your role as an advisor on topics related to workplace strategy and the future of work, and you just brought up your own work situation. How do you see the future of work in the federal government, especially with regards to hybrid working or remote working, affecting the mission in this area?
Well, I, as a workplace strategist, I was long a believer in the benefits of telework and the ability of agencies, depending on the mission that they have, to meet their mission when their folks are working some portion of their time from home. It's been very interesting at GSA. Before the pandemic, only about 3% of our employees were fully remote, and most of us worked maybe a couple of days a week from home. Post-pandemic, our number of remote employees like myself, it's 43% of the agency, and most others go in 1 or 2 days a week after that. And we're meeting our mission. Not every agency can do that. It's been very helpful to be an agency that has the ability to support telework, because in an emergency like a pandemic, one of the strategies that ASHRAE 241 mentions is to reduce the occupancy of the building, and we can do that and meet our mission, and many agencies can as well. So I think it's an important tool for us to have.
If I could follow up, is there just that's a helpful perspective, and certainly the 3 to 43% is useful. Do you see any pressure, whether it's from appropriators or from even just within the budget holders and at GSA, from actually continuing a mission in the 300 million plus square feet area? I mean, in other words, if you have less occupancy, is there less interest in pushing forward some of these safety measures and research efforts to develop safety measures?
It's a really important question. I think that the pressure on GSA or federal agencies to reduce their space requirements is real. We are seeing agencies come forward with requests to consolidate. in a lot of cases, that's an opportunity, I think, to move people out of expensive leased properties where lease rates are high, be that a federal building or a private sector lease, into and consolidate into federal buildings or lower cost locations. Where we have facilities that are underperforming and it will be difficult for us to bring them up to a high level of performance, there's an opportunity to close out those buildings, to decommission them and have people move elsewhere. So I think there is a concern long-term about the effect on the rent that we can bring in. And there's also an opportunity for us to divest ourselves of lower performing facilities. And I know that's a big focus of the Public Building Service right now.
Just a quick follow-up on that, on your answer to that question, was an item on NPR this morning that said that 80%, at least this person said, 80% of the federal workforce is outside of the District of Columbia. How does that apply to GSA? I know that that's a concern in the district about federal employees wanting them to come back to work because of the impact on the city, and other cities, I'm sure, have the same concerns, but just quick.
I don't have a lot of good data about how federal workers across, there are 2 million federal employees across the federal government. GSA houses about 1 million of those, so we don't house everybody. The number of remote workers moving away from a central location like DC is an interesting question, and I think one that we don't really know the answer to yet. I want to say that, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I want to say that the number of remote employees that have relocated to someplace far away from their original location of duty is relatively small, on the order of 1% at GSA. We're only 12,000 employees, but I don't know across the board what's okay.
Thank you very much. Let me thank the panel. And thank you for your service. Thank you for your government service. It's not easy, as we well know, and there are too many people that have nasty things to say about public servants, and you're all examples of the best. Thank you very much. Yeah. Let me ask my colleagues whether they have any final comments. Fred?
Thank you. Just real quickly to say thank you, and we've learned a lot today from all of our witnesses. And I think that the turnout in the room is really quite extraordinary. It's a testament to how critical this issue is. So thank you again.
We've learned a lot today, but mostly we've learned about the number of talented people that are working in this area, about the technology and the scientific breakthroughs and the research that's going on. And many people have very clear ideas about what to do. We've talked a lot about incentives and regulation and maybe the insurance companies pushing, or tax credits or infrastructure, whatever, or accreditation, using the accreditation process and what government can do. It's clear that the private sector has a deep interest in this. They're in the business, and government clearly has an interest because they're in the building business. The big building business. And we have a lot of stakeholders and a lot of actors and a lot of people working in laboratories and trying to get their arms around this. The question for all of us is, how do we move the needle? How do we get standards? Perhaps without a top-down system. We certainly have gotten standards before without a top-down system. We've gotten it because there have been crises. We put building codes in place across the country. And we've done lots of other things in public health to improve the public health, basically done by the states, push from their local governments and from the public. And it may be a combination of the two, but we certainly know that there's some very clear thinking going on and some outstanding work and extraordinary people working in this area. So thank you to all of you. And I hope you'll come to our next sessions. And thanks again to the panel.